You're tuned in to Horror Slop, where the stories are rotting, truth is twisted, and sleep, forget about it.
Yeah, welcome to the pit. It's gross, it's creepy, and honestly, it's kind of my vibe. Hope you like nightmares, because tonight's tale, it slithers.
Straight from the darkest corners of Reddit. Real stories, real fear, and just enough blood to stain your soul.
So at least grab your bed sheets, so grab a flashlight, and maybe a therapist.
This is Horror Slop. Every night starts somewhere, and this is where yours begins. First story, first chill. Let's see if you make it to the end.
My little sister was already there. She turned to me and smiled cheerily. Morning. Only Dad got pancakes. We got toast. But today, Dad had nothing but an empty plate. I sat down in front of the serving I assumed was mine, but I was hesitant to eat. Where's Mom? I asked no one in particular. She has a headache. Dad answered. I couldn't meet his eyes. Eat up, she made them for you. I dawdled home that evening. Things changed, sometimes. They got good. But it never lasted more than a few hours, a day if we were lucky. And it was always worse after. I almost tripped on Lily's bag when I got in. She dumped it right by the door. I picked it up and made to sneak to our room. She knew Dad hated messes. Now we both pay. Okay. I managed before scuttling to my room. Lily stood up on her bed and stared down at me. You're going to be just like him if you keep that up. Her words stung. I just wanted to protect her. I sat on my bed. What the fuck was going on? I was too afraid to verify what she claimed, and didn't really believe it, so I just waited for the eventual stomp down the hallway. But it never came. Dad sat before his empty plate. Mom was nowhere to be seen. Heya, he said. Hi Dad. Lily replied. I admired her ability to just go with it. We sat down and began to eat when beckoned to do so by Dad. Eventually it was too much. I had to ask. Dad. Where's yours? My voice always came out so meek when talking to him. I hated it. Don't worry about mine. Just eat. Eat up and dash. Emicham. I continued to eat. Lily was staring between us like a tennis match. Something was very wrong. I hadn't really talked to Mom since the day before yesterday. It was like she was avoiding us. And Dad, what the fuck was happening there? Are you awake? Lily's whisper interrupted my thoughts. Yeah. So that was it. He'd beat her up real bad. And now he was playing nice for a little while. I fell asleep worrying. For the first time in my life I decided to be brave. Mom. I said. She didn't stop washing up. Mom. I have to talk to you. Alone. Dad eyed me. Mom, please. I have to talk to you. Darl, maybe you should talk to her. Dad suggested. It was so funny, so strange. Dad being the one to walk on eggshells. He sensed she wasn't happy behind him and out came that pitiful smile again. Please. Darling. You don't speak to me. Remember? I backed up. Any minute now. Any minute and he'd. Please. 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 Dad grit out. I'm sorry. How many times do I have to say it? What can I do? Dad pounded his fist on his plate. It shattered and he cut his palm but didn't care. I jumped and almost ran. You fucking bitch. Dad whispered. I should have smashed your head all the way through. I should have smashed your head all the way fucking through. But you did, darling. You did, remember? I haven't seen her face in so long. And Dad never leaves the table. He's beginning to stink.
Anyway, let's lighten the mood with something fun and... Nah, just kidding. It gets worse. Hit it.
I stared at it, my thoughts wandered off on a tangent. Had the little girl in the back seat been holding it when the car had smashed into the tree? Was it her blood? Did she even know what had happened? Or had it been too quick? My mind drifted off into introspective reverie. I carried the little pink bunny to my work truck and stuck it in the passenger seat. Now I knew I would have to figure out how to get the crushed remains of the SUV on the back of my truck so I could haul it off the road. I'd seen what was left of them, sure, before they zipped them up in the black rubber bags and carted them off. They're waiting for you, I lied. At the hospital. They're fine. Oh, okay, said the voice. It sounded unconvinced. Mister? Yes. I shook my head. I don't think they can do much to help you, honey. I don't know if that's a good idea, I replied. Did she know she was inside her stuffed animal? Did she suspect? A silent, tense moment passed, and then she said, "Are you lying to me?" Yes, I said before I could stop myself. I'm so sorry. It's really okay, replied the girl. This has happened before. What? When she spoke again, her voice was hushed. I go inside him sometimes, she said. My bunny, Mr. Frank. When I'm upset. Sometimes I can even go inside other people, but only if I know them really well. I try not to, though. They get squeezed when I do, into the corner of their minds. They don't like it. Oh, I said. I didn't know what else to say. Yes. Can you help me? Can you take me to my sister? I want to see her. No problem, I said. I'm sure she'll be happy to see you. Without any further discussion, I climbed into the driver's seat and we set off. I followed the directions as the girl gave them to me, and 45 minutes later we had arrived at the parking lot to a dormitory building at the local community college. The police station and my boss had called me a few times, no doubt wondering why I hadn't cleaned up the wreck, but I had sent their calls straight to voicemail. I'd figure out how to explain myself later. I took the stuffed bunny from the passenger seat and walked to the sister's door, number 401. 3 solemn knocks and 20 seconds later the door was answered by a young blonde girl in her early 20s. Your sister, I trailed off. Without thinking, I complied. I just wanted to tell you that. Get the fuck. The words froze in her throat. Her body went slack. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed on the floor in a boneless heap. What do you mean? The only tree for miles, and we crashed into it, she said. It was me. I did it. My dad was yelling at me he deserved it. No, I said. No. I couldn't say anything else. 1,000 broken thoughts and ugly feelings were fighting a melee in my head. It's okay, she said. You saved me. I won't hurt you. Unless you make me. You won't make me, will you? I froze for a moment, unable to speak. I shook my head. 10.
Need a break? Too bad. These stories don't wait, and neither do we. Next one's worse, in the best way.
It's sad when the only former high school classmate you see is your drug dealer. Most of our nerd table at the lunchroom became lawyers, doctors, tech executives. Except for Drew, dealing drugs is just one of his jobs. He bartends at weddings, buys junker cars and takes them to Mexico to flip for a few grand. Actually, I wanted to pick your brain on something. And it's better if you're not high when I mention any of this, he said. If it's legal advice, you better have given me good shit. I replied. No. I mean, I don't think it is, he said. Do you remember Carrie K. Rothwell? Drew asked. She had hit a deer. Or to be specific, the deer hit her. Her Jeep Cherokee smashed so hard into it that its head was decapitated. And it smashed right into Carrie K., killing her. So I found her YouTube page. Drew replied. Yeah. She had a screen name on AOL. Millhouse's Goldfish 84, he said. Anyways. I sort of think about her every now and then. And it hit me that maybe she had used that username on a forum or had a blog with it, Drew said. Holy crap. That's her. I said. What would people think if they knew that my mom taught religious studies at a Catholic school but was really into Aleister Crowley? The next part of the video had her inside of a crypt, whistling, as if looking for a dog. Walking through the woods was a young deer. Carrie K. sang a song. To be specific, it sounded more like someone trying to sing while hiccuping. I am too. Can we cry together? She began crying. The deer began to shudder as she put her arm around it. I should get going, I said. But he clicked on it and held my arm down. I wanted to make sure, he said. I know, he said. These videos didn't even get uploaded until 2014. How did I not know that? He asked.
Something's still listening, and it wants more. Next story. Just don't say its name.
I'm a park ranger and I found a town that doesn't exist, by Park Ranger Baker. My name is Samuel Baker, I'm a Yellowstone National Park Ranger and I need some advice. I've spent my entire career fighting wildfires for the National Park Service, and after 2 decades in the field I thought I'd seen everything. Then, about 4 hours ago, an entire town just appeared in the middle of Yellowstone National Park, and the other ranger and I are the only ones who've been in it. We're not alone, however, as you might expect from something appearing out of nowhere inside one of America's most famous parks. The town is home to many people, some of whom have been there for years. They all seem perfectly normal, but they aren't aware that they live inside a national park. Hungry Horse wasn't a ghost town, or even abandoned, it was thriving. Some of these people look familiar, I said, looking over at Thomas. He nodded. I know what you mean, Sam. I recognized a couple people in the diner too. It's weird. It's weird. Those words echoed in my head as I watched a man carrying a bucket walk down the sidewalk. It's weird, I repeated silently to myself. My eyes followed his movements. The man carried himself with confidence and purpose, but he never looked up at where he was walking. Instead, he stared straight ahead and continued forward without looking back once. He disappeared around the corner of a building and I noticed another person staring directly at me. He was tall and thin, wearing a black hiking jacket. His face was pale and he was bald. He was standing in the doorway of a small coffee shop. That's how we found out that almost every single person in Hungry Horse had been reported missing from national parks. We spoke to everyone we could find. Some refused to talk, others were friendly enough, but none of them knew anything about why they were there. As far as they were concerned, they lived in Hungry Horse, Montana. They weren't sure exactly when they arrived there. A lot of them couldn't remember much before arriving in Hungry Horse. How do you feel about being here? Do you miss anywhere else? Your family, maybe. As far as she knew, this was the only home she'd ever known. I tried to ask if she missed her family, but she just smiled and told me that her family was right here in Hungry Horse, Montana. I snapped back to reality and looked at my partner. Thomas had started quivering in fear. Sorry, what did you say? I said, I think we should leave. I don't want to be here anymore. I agree. Let's go. I said. I'm going to call this in. He said. This whole thing is bullshit, but we better document it anyway. I mean, how could an entire town, full of missing people, just appear in the middle of Yellowstone? I nodded. Okay, I'll be in the cabin. I think I need some time to process all this shit. I sat down on the couch and closed my eyes. It all felt unreal. I kept thinking about the hiker we'd found out in the woods last week. He died while out on a hike in the wilderness. He'd been alone and confused. But I just saw him alive and well, in a town that doesn't exist. I opened my eyes and looked around. I took in a deep breath and let it out. It smelled like wood smoke and pine. I stood up and started pacing the room. What am I supposed to make of all this? I asked myself. Is this some kind of sick joke? Did the government put a town in Yellowstone for some reason? What if it's not a town, maybe it's a cover-up for something worse? I thought before zoning out. There was a knock on the door. It startled me out of my daydream. Come in. I yelled.
Sleeping yet? Didn't think so. Next story's up. And yeah, it's worse. You're welcome.
I used to work at a pill mill in Florida. I've saw a lot weirder stuff than just drug addicts, by I Escaped from a Lab. Part 3. Part 5. Parts 8 and 9. I'm going to try and get this started. For those of you lucky enough not to know, a pill mill is a place where doctors pump out prescriptions for absurd amounts of painkillers and Xanax, bolstered by laws in Florida that allowed them to do so with no oversight. Before I go into what kind of horrible shit became commonplace there, I'll take a moment to describe this incredible den of narcotics, desperation, and depravity. Ever since I called that number on Craigslist and went for an interview 1 hour later without emailing a resume, I have had a pit in my stomach. It was in a horrible part of town, the congested and strangely crowded center of West Palm Beach, in a strip mall that was almost entirely empty except for us, a Jamaican restaurant and a massage parlor. Yeah, that kind of massage parlor. They actually complained to the cops about our patients going in to use the bathroom and passing out with needles in their arms. The normally empty parking lot was filled with junkies by 4 in the morning, every morning. If it wasn't for the absurd pay and free drugs, I would have noped the fuck out of there on the first day. The first day working was the day after my 10-minute interview with a beautiful, but clearly very stressed, former strip named Deborah. Deborah had dark brown hair and enjoyed wearing expensive, slightly trashy, clothing that she would sometimes send me to pick up, courtesy of her gangster boyfriend who ran with the Aryan Brotherhood and owned the clinic as well as 5 others through various patsies. Debbie opened the place up at 5, long after the patients had gathered in the parking lot. I know, I hired you yesterday, remember? Hey, do you? Debbie was about to go on, but suddenly stopped when she realized I was talking to someone in the hallway. Her eyes shot open in terror. She glanced over to her left, but the wall in between her and that hall would have stopped her from seeing the person I had assumed was a coworker. The lights were off in that hallway, but I got the distinct impression that whoever was there was wearing a mask, or had something wrong with their face. I saw a distinctly round, pale face. Look at your car, Wilkes. I turned around and looked at my car, hoping a junkie wasn't vandalizing it. No one was near it. Before I could turn around, I felt Debbie's hand on my back, pushing me out. All right, shouldn't you wait for whoever? I was about to motion to the person who now seemed to be standing on one leg, fully outside of the bathroom now and in the end of the hall, bending at a 90-degree angle at the waist towards me with their face still directly aimed at me. Let's go. Just go home, someone will tell you when it's cool. It's alright, we're friends with Debbie. Yeah, I muttered, stunned as I counted the wad he had just handed me. Great. The redhead seemed genuinely delighted. Listen, my name is Dave, I'm going to give you my cell. If you ever see that person, or anyone else like them again, give me a call no matter what. Debbie will fill you in on the rest. Debbie definitely didn't seem to want to talk about it, and we never did. After that, creepy became a norm. I got accustomed to the junkies, the drugs, the river of psychic sleaze that powered through Florida and into the rest of the country. You need to tell me if you have seen anything weird. Anything. A car where there shouldn't have been one, any weird lights on your way to work, people doing anything weird. And you need to tell me this shit right the fuck now, or the split second you see anything. Anything. Sure enough, about 4 days later the guy came in. He had shocking blue eyes, blonde hair and a flawless comb-over, although he didn't seem to need it. His hair was thicker than a border collie's, and a white long-sleeve shirt tucked into immaculate blue pants with very thin white stripes down their sides. And a BOLO tie with what looked like a piece of turquoise surrounded by ivory. He was smiling ear to ear, and each of his teeth were radiant. He may have been the only person there with a full mouth, other than the doctors. He looked like he was ready for a very nice church. Debbie saw him too, and she looked terrified. She grabbed me by the shoulder before he got to the counter. Don't. Just don't. She said, urgently. I nodded, despite him being easily the least creepy person in the room by far, including in comparison to myself. It was at that moment, however, that I noticed that several other people, patients, were also horrified. One old woman with track marks running up both arms turned around and walked straight out when she saw him, and the room got quiet quick. Good morning, friend. He beamed at me. I motioned to the woman behind him, who didn't seem to know who he was. She was happy to check in instead and told me her name so that I could look up her file. Excuse me, but could you help me, please? He seemed just as confused as anyone else would be who had just been rudely ignored in favor of a junkie. Except he was suddenly talking in the direction of the woman. She looked from me to him and then back again, but quietly continued her check-in, taking her pack of papers and sitting down, clearly sensing something was wrong. How do I leave? Debbie told me she would deal with it, because we sure as fuck didn't need the cops around, but I never heard about it again. We saw junkies doing a lot of fucked up stuff, but one of the worst things was when people brought their kids into this narco playland. Once a young red-headed mother and her little boy came in. She looked a little disheveled but not nearly as bad as most patients. We had to get her to pee in a cup, so she asked me to watch her kid while she went to the bathroom. I said sure, and just a few seconds later, she came back. But she didn't have the pee cup in hand, she just smirked at me, took the little boy's hand and walked him out. I guess she decided not to do it, because there was a line to go to the bathroom, but a few minutes later she came out, again, and this time she was looking for her little boy. Needless to say, she called the cops, but our security footage just showed the little kid wandering out by himself, and the cops blamed the mother. Apparently they found the little boy's ear at the edge of the parking lot, but they kept putting up missing posters for a while. They eventually stopped putting new ones up though. There is a lot more, too much more, and I have to get back to work. I'll try and post the rest as fast as I can. The second and third ones are ready now, I'm just waiting on that timer thing. I probably should have timed this better for Christmas.
Alright, quick break before our next story. Let's check in with our resident spooky dude. Hey, you ever smile, or is your face just stuck that way?
I smiled once. The sky bled. A child vanished. Never again.
Okay, drama. Maybe next time just try a dad joke.
Knock knock. They never made it to the door.
Wow. Fine, stay moody. Anyways, back to the darkness. This next one's got teeth.
After rooting through some drawers, she pulled out a thick stack of papers. Here you go. 1. Your garage must be kept closed at all times, unless you are currently entering or exiting the house. 4. You must always wear neutral-colored clothing when exiting or entering your home, and when walking around the development. She hemmed and hawed. Well, probably not. But, you can just get one of those long duster cardigans, or a jacket, in a neutral color and wear it when you go out. It's not a super strict rule, you can have some color showing. Not a super strict rule, I repeated, pointedly nodding in her direction. I see. I continued to read. 5. Never knock on a neighbor's door unannounced. Similarly, never answer the door if you aren't expecting anyone. As a community, Pelican Peak values privacy and safety above all else. 8. The homeowner's dues are $150 per month, due on the first weekday of every month. I stared at the sheet. This is pretty restrictive. But look at what you're getting for the price, she said. Granite countertops and mahogany cabinets. Stainless steel appliances. A rain shower in the master bathroom. All for under $200,000. I did love rain showers. ////. I made an offer the next week. Several weeks later, I was moving in, along with several new black cardigans and jackets. My corgi, Buff, seemed to like the place well enough. She liked watching the squirrels run by, something she couldn't do from the window of my 11th floor apartment. I wasn't going to sleep, of course. It was time for my 3-hour Seinfeld marathon before bed. Buff? And what if it's some crazy guy sitting on my porch or something? Or a rabid squirrel? The street wasn't empty. A tall figure stood on the sidewalk, right in front of my house. The light from my window barely illuminated his form, but I could still make it out. He picked up my red, plastic bin. But there was no garbage truck, or wheelbarrow, or anything else around to dump it in. Where's he going to dump it? I thought. Is he just going to carry the bins one by one to the compost? That's really unethic. His mouth stretched open, far wider than I've seen any mouth open. Then he poured the contents in his mouth. A light cracking sound emerged from the darkness as he chewed up the bones. I stared, horrified, and Buff did too. Then she began to bark. Ruff. Ruff. I let the curtain fall. I backed away, hugging Buff, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when the knocking started. And I remembered, perhaps, the most important rule of them all.
You feel that? That weird pressure in the room? Yeah, that's the algorithm. It knows you're watching, and it gets real cranky when you don't feed it. A simple ritual helps. Click the little thumbs up, tap subscribe, say its name 3 times into your phone mic. Kidding, probably.
Engagement appeases the darkness. You know what to do.
Good, human. Now, back to the horror.
Today I was late picking up my son from school, by polonium poisoning. Oh my fucking god. I screamed suddenly, looking at the clock. James and I had agreed that working on home office would be the best way for me to keep track of our children's activities. I hurriedly threw a jacket over my pitiful working pajamas and grabbed the car keys. I'll admit to have driven slightly recklessly, the thought of my poor boy sitting all alone in the playground too hard to bear. "Hey, Mommy," he greeted me, cheerfully. His golden hair was covered in sweat, despite the cool weather. "Hello, Tommy." I smiled back. At least his clothes weren't muddied. Too much running around today. Is 5 supposed to be a strange age? His older sister was the most quiet, easygoing girl during kindergarten. I can't believe it's been over 5 years ago. Maybe it's because he's a boy. Boys are always difficult. "Don't worry, baby, I'll bring food from Mom," was his reply. Great. Now my delightful mother-in-law knew I'm not able to work, take care of my children and feed my family at the same time. A horrible thought crossed my mind. Why did we even have 3? I always said I wanted only 2 kids. I left Tommy playing downstairs and headed back to my office. If I hurried, I could get all my work done before James and our baby girl were back. My oldest was at our neighbor's, getting some school project done. God bless the Davidsons and their well-behaved daughter who's good friends with mine. Why the fuck James didn't come fetch me for dinner when he got home? I went downstairs angrily, but stopped dead on my tracks as soon as I realized the smell. James and my 2 daughters were completely mangled, their blood and guts all scattered. Their eyes and part of their viscera were missing. I'll never know if they screamed before being ripping apart, but I'm assuming they didn't, or the neighbors would have called the police. Unless the neighbors were eaten too. Tommy said he was hungry. And then I realized I don't know any Tommy. I don't even have a son, Dot.
Whew, telling gave me chills. But hey, we're just getting started. The next one's sharper. You'll see.
My husband always makes such a mess. I'm always finding little brown hairs of his all over the house. Just this morning, I found a couple strands lying on the couch. Your father, I always tell my son, might as well be a dog with the amount of hair he sheds. It's a full-time job scooping them up, but I do it anyways, because a clean house is a happy house. Not to worry, I told him, I have it taken care of. This was just what he needed to hear, and I handed him a second shirt instead. It was the one with the blue stripes that he likes so much. My husband grabbed his wallet and rushed out the door, still in time to catch the early train if he hurried. Not even 10 seconds after my husband had left, and my son was already bursting into tears. He pointed at the underside of his arm, and I immediately located a purple bruise. Another one? I asked. Well, I know just how to fix that. Of course, there was only one thing that could fix a bruise. He was going to need a magical mommy kiss. My son held up his wrist to me with tears in his eyes and I gave it a peck. Did you want to go to the store with Mommy today? I asked him in an excited voice. I knew my son would love that. He always loved going to the store with me. I guess it's about as much of an adventure as a boy of 4 can have. Be very quiet, I whispered. Hello? I asked, walking into the kitchen. I was so scared. It had a clump of hair attached to its head. My husband's hair.
Still with us? Good. That last one was just the warm-up. Let's go deeper.
Oh, shit, by Beifel's Disciple. Daddy. Oliver screamed from the other end of the line. A parent knows how to discern each type of his child's scream. This one was genuine terror. I began to hyperventilate. Please, Daddy. Do what they say. It will be simple. Please do what they say, Daddy. He started to cry. Please. The other voice suddenly came back on. Take the baby from the woman's stroller. Run. A person really is nothing more than a list of completed choices. I had to decide very quickly what choice I was willing to live with. I judged her for how long it took to hear a scream. He squinted, extended his arms, and produced the tiniest, mightiest wail that he could muster. I smiled wide enough to rip my face in half. I hadn't killed the kid. A crumpled white BMW was lodged into what remained of the Starbucks wall. One wheel still spun, but the bloody arm that dangled from the ruined passenger window was entirely devoid of life. The phone rang. I picked it up immediately. She's alive, but is buried beneath the rubble. Far better than she would have been otherwise, the voice explained calmly. Now. Find the woman. Reunite her with the baby. You need to get ready for what happens next. We're watching you. Part 3. Part 5.
You're still tuned to Horror Slop. Frequency unknown. Stories endless. Let's spin the next nightmare.
I was one of the psychiatrists whose responsibility it was to diagnose him when he was admitted. The hospital in which I work is specifically designed for the more severe patients. Patients that are, for whatever reason, more a danger to themselves or others than most mental patients. While most assume the latter is the difficult part of my job, the former is actually the more strenuous factor in working here. I'm fairly adept at protecting myself, which most people don't often assume upon looking at me, but stopping our patients from harming themselves is actually much more difficult. No amount of kickboxing and Muay Thai can stop a patient from cutting a hole in her arm when we aren't looking. Because of our particular specialization in the more severe cases and disorders, this part of the job is even harder. I've been trained to help people with depression, which is not to say that it's easy. Depression is very serious, but it's certainly easier than a man who is convinced beyond a sliver of a doubt that the only way to bring his dead wife back is to remove his lower intestine. But Arthur, he is an entirely different story, for reasons I'm still unsure of. When I had first read his file, I believed he had a schizoaffective disorder. He'd been cited with intense delusions, possible hallucinations, written as spreading hallucination, whatever the hell that means, and extreme aggression, not to the point of violence. He hadn't had any physical incidents as far as I could tell, but he was apparently known to go out of his way to insult people, always finding the perfect words to ruin someone. Nigh sociopathic, but he could just be a dick. Delusions, hallucinations, and a mood disorder seemed like schizoaffective to me. Of course, I'd have to wait until I actually met him to be sure. Medical notes aren't always the easiest to understand between doctors, and whoever took this definitely had their own way of writing things. As was expected, the file didn't quite line up with reality, but it was strange. I was fairly sure he wasn't having hallucinations, but he didn't even act like he was hallucinating. I initially suspected that the strange notation was a typo or an attempt to convey some sort of panoramic hallucination or perhaps even some hallucination affecting proprioception. The word spreading was terribly nonspecific. But I couldn't find any sign of hallucinations, and he certainly wasn't faking any. His mannerisms seemed fairly average. As for his supposed mood disorder, well, I was completely surprised, even after reading his file's description. I met with him expecting the worst, approaching him with 2 nurses and our newest clinical psychologist, Dr. Matthias D. Bunny, who was just spreading his wings in the new environment. I'm going to be honest, I couldn't imagine referring to him as Dr. Bunny without laughing, so I had resorted to calling him by his first name exclusively. He was waiting in admissions along with a nurse, I assume involved with his previous caretakers, as she definitely wasn't one of ours given the brown uniform. "Hello," I said, approaching him with his file in my hand. "I'm Dr. Penn, one of the assistant directors of the hospital and your doctor. I'll be helping you transition into your stay here." "Oh wow, a woman," he half chuckled, not losing eye contact with me. "Fantastic, one of these ones." Here I thought progress was being made in the world. I was already fed up, and my tone became flat. "I'm sure you see where this is going. This isn't that strange a delusion, all things considered. What amounted to a different iteration of coded delusion hardly seemed reason to bring him to this hospital, and I wasn't so sure this was even the place for him. He seemed fully functioning and fairly socially aware. I was, however, quickly proven wrong. Within 5 minutes of me leaving his room after going through standard admission procedure, he was caught trying to end his own life. He was found on the ground with blood all over his arms. He had broken his bedpost and used it to slice down the length of his arms. Deep. Deep enough to be able to differentiate muscle fibers once the wounds were cleaned, which was incredibly difficult. The incisions were surprisingly clean, and at the deepest were 2.23 centimeters deep, almost straight in between his radius and ulnar. Were the wounds not so precise and clean, I don't know that we would have been able to save his life. He was immediately moved to the west wing of the hospital, where we put the patients that required a more watchful eye. I'm not sure if it was because of his manners or even any real medical thinking, but I was hesitant to restrain him in any severe way. No padded room or straitjackets, just a new, featureless room with constant supervision. "Oh, Assistant Director, how can I help?" "Penn is fine. I wanted to ask about your request to move Arthur Matthews and your reasoning. It seems severe to move him into a padded room, let alone after only 5 days." "I see that, but trust me, I think it's necessary. Being suicidal hardly seems like enough reason to dash." Suicidal doesn't even begin to fully explain what this guy is. I've worked with patients with bizarre delusions twice as erratic and anxious as him that have less of a death wish. I'm not. I promise. We've tried restraining him, removing implements, hell, we put him even in a straitjacket. The man is bent on ending his own life. He says he has to wake up. I sighed. I could tell he was stressed out, and while he seemed erratic and frustrated, he didn't seem like he would have any reason to lie. But 19 times in 1 week was a lot. I'd experienced determined patients before, but this was an entirely new level. "Look," I said with a sigh, "if you'd like, I can remove you from his case and make my own judgment about how to treat him." I was one of the few people in the hospital with both an MD and a PhD in psychology, so I had no trouble taking over for him outside of my other duties as assistant director. He exhaled deeply, almost seeming defeated. "That might be best. I'll get it done." I started to step away when he said one last thing. "Listen, Penn," he almost whispered it, stuttering and looking around like he was afraid. Or maybe just worried. "Something is wrong. I know that sounds obvious, but I mean wrong. He means something. Take the warning." He walked away in a hurry before I could ask him what that could possibly mean. I went home that night, sat on my couch, and started mentally preparing myself from whatever nightmare could possibly make Matthias act that way. For whatever reason, I ran through what few interactions I'd gone through with him. He was polite, but not strangely so, and for whatever reason, I couldn't help but feel distinct comfort in his personality. Thinking about why, however, scared me a little bit. I knew there was no real reason I'd feel any different about him. He was another patient of the dozens I've met over the years, but something just felt different. I wanted to say familiar, but that doesn't seem right. It was almost like déjà vu. I felt distinctly aware that nothing about him was particularly reminiscent of anyone or anything I'd met before, but my mind still had that fog of uncertainty, like maybe I should be recognizing him. Day 1. Arthur Matthews has been diagnosed with severe delusional disorder, presenting with an extreme delusional belief that he is presently dreaming. This has resulted in a seemingly inextinguishable desire to end his life, an action that his delusion demands as the sole way of waking up. As of 7:30 p.m., he has attempted to end his own life 4 times, despite being treated to prevent such attempts and being directly supervised. I'll be attempting talk therapy, but I have a slight worry that it may be ineffective at preventing his suicidal thoughts, but it is too soon to tell if that can change. His most common method for killing himself seems to be cutting himself, presumably in an attempt to bleed himself out. Why he'd choose an arguably very painful and messy method is uncertain. I presume it might simply be the easiest or most obvious. I've yet to learn enough about him to pinpoint a reasoning. However, in addition to the 3 attempts to cut his arms, abdomen, and neck open, he also was found attempting to gouge his eyes out, scratching his eyes using a piece of metal wire before being restrained and sedated by nurses. He was found with severe scratching on his sclera, with surprisingly minimal damage to the cornea. I don't expect his vision to be severely diminished, but I've instructed those watching over him to watch him closely. We still aren't sure where the wire came from. Day 2. There was another incident last night. Arthur was seen trying to bite his own tongue, presumably to either drown himself in the blood or choke on it. Nearby staff noticed immediately and stopped him. However, he did sustain injuries to his tongue. His speech has been affected and there is noticeable wincing when he eats or drinks. I've directed staff to have at least 2 people watching him at once. Joel says it's unnecessary and that one man can sedate him easily, but I won't be taking chances. I spoke to him again today, this time more closely than yesterday's more cursory and introductory session. By the time our session began, it was 2:30, and he'd attempted suicide twice since the night before, both of which were causing enough bleeding to lose consciousness, the second being in the infirmary itself using a tongue depressor of all things. Below is an audio recording of the conversation, in his room in the infirmary. I'll add a transcription here with some of my personal notes. No, but she tries to as often as she can. A. Delusion you mean? Do you think of it as a delusion? A. Of course not, but I assumed you did so I thought it'd move the conversation along. Chuckle, I guess that didn't work considering I've been here talking for a solid 30 seconds now. How would you describe it? Your dream. A. I don't really consider it in any particular way, I just know I plan to wake up. So when do you think you first fell asleep? Younger, older, perhaps as a child even. But you know you are in fact asleep. How can you be so sure of that? Noted rustling, as if that got his attention, tears. A. Things look strange. Wrong. I can't explain it. It's like looking at a corner and realizing there are too many degrees for it to look like it does, but your eyes see it anyway. Not sure if this example has any significance or if it was just a really creative way to express it. And you're sure this means that this isn't real? A. Deep sigh. The next words he said were the first I'd heard without his usual cheery and generally friendly demeanor, instead taking on one of dejection and worry. "Look, I know, this is going to sound crazy. If you know, then why not hide it? Why not try to appear sane?" Conversation. Between whom? I have no clue. But I hear them, understand them. They've been asleep for a while, they need to wake up, you need to wake them up. A sign, some sign to tell them to wake up might work. Those are the most coherent I can remember at least. Of course. Have a nice day, and ask us if you need anything else. Day 4. Arthur has improved, in fact, he may be overcoming his delusions entirely. I believe I can help him recover fully. Nothing but good signs. Day 5. I shouldn't have let you take his case. He's fine, just let him be, or assign another doctor his care. Don't worry about it. I really cannot stress enough that you shouldn't try to work with him. I tried calling Matthias, no answer. The wording of the last 3 entries was obviously very strange. Something else seemed incredibly off to me, I don't know why. It almost reminded me of Arthur's description of the angles in the corner. Like it was right there in front of me, but I couldn't see it, my head wouldn't let me. The last entry was obviously written directly for me, I don't know if 2 before that were as well. I assume the weird characters are just something in the file that got corrupted, but the shortness of that section makes me think it likely wasn't important. Still, I'm confused by the reports, I plan on asking him what's going on tomorrow.
Still with us? Good. That last one was just the warm-up. Let's go deeper.
How Would You Like to Die Today, by EAP App. It was just redundant at this point, I already knew what I had to do. I ignored it and laid in bed, pretending to be asleep. But there was no point, it knew I was awake already. I could feel a dull ache throughout my body from yesterday when I was violently beaten to death. Now, I was as good as new, except for the soreness. How would you like to die today? Would you like some choices? Yes. I replied. I looked above its head and at my reflection in the mirror, as if that was supposed to save me from this. Would you like me to repeat your choices? I'll do the jump. I replied. Choice noted. You have until 11:59 p.m. to die. I'll update you every 2 hours. I got ready for work, ate breakfast, and dropped my kids off at school. I was at a red light when I saw a girl on a skateboard roll out into the street as a car was passing by. The driver managed to stop the car, and the girl held onto the hood of the car as the driver honked angrily. She would have died if you didn't do this. I glanced at the passenger seat and there it was, its shoes dripping mud on the floor of my car. I stared at the left one, a dirty black shoe with the missing buckle, until the car behind me honked its horn and snapped me out of my trance. I finally got to work and spent the rest of the day at my desk, getting reminders every 2 hours. I didn't finish work until 9:30. I had less than 2 hours left before I had to jump off the roof. I was already falling asleep in the dark office. Everyone else had left, and the cleaning crew would get here at any minute. I must have dozed off for a while because I woke up at the last reminder. I begrudgingly got up and made my way up to the roof. It was freezing up there, and I hadn't brought a jacket with me. Why would I need one though, if I was going to die? You have 15 minutes left. Someone must die. I know. But I don't want to do this anymore. You're selfish, you've saved a lot of people who would otherwise have died. I don't care. This was your choice, no. I'm not doing it. Someone must die. If not you, then someone else. I understand that. Are you okay with that? She died anyway. And then Jean left me and the kids. I walked back down, got into my car, and drove home in silence. It didn't appear in my car again, or at all, for the rest of the night. I got home and checked on the kids. My sister had put them to bed and they were fast asleep under their matching blankets. I changed my clothes and fell into bed. I finally worked up the nerve to look. It was empty. She's still sleeping. What? Why didn't you wake her up? I asked, looking at the time. I tried. She didn't want to get up. I walked into the room and over to the bed where I pulled the covers down, revealing her head, her curls crushed up and messy from sleep. I stood up straight and turned around slowly to look at it. It was even worse than I thought. It looked different now, short, messy brown curls instead of the long brown hair. It was a new face, a new everything entirely. I stared at it, and I couldn't get my lips to move. Of course, it wasn't over. The torture had just been turned up a notch.
That last one tasted like fear and poor decisions. Let's see what the next bite stirs. Hope you're hungry.
I was living in apartment 311 for a couple weeks before I noticed anything was wrong. It started out with simple stuff, like various knick-knacks being placed on the wrong shelves, snacks and small objects going missing, things like that. Once or twice I found the fridge left open. These things would only happen when I was asleep, and it made me feel like I was going crazy. There was no way anyone could be breaking into my apartment just to steal some useless crap and move around some collectibles. The door was locked whenever I went to bed, and even if someone hypothetically had the key, I always made sure to bolt the door as well. I considered getting some security cameras set up, but I balked at the price when I looked into that possibility. Though the apartment was admittedly cheap, between rent and utilities I still couldn't afford to set up an entire security system. I tried to put it out of my mind, assuming that maybe I was just sleepwalking, or getting up for a midnight snack and forgetting by the next morning. I'd never been an easy sleeper. I was often prone to night terrors and other disturbances, which had only gotten worse now that I was in an unfamiliar environment. Of all the sleep problems I've experienced, by far the least pleasant is sleep paralysis. It used to happen fairly rarely, maybe once every 2 to 3 months, but after moving into the apartment it became an almost weekly occurrence. Now, usually my sleep paralysis is fairly mild. I find myself unable to move, eyes open, and I find it difficult to breathe. Sometimes I feel like there is a presence in the room with me, but before I moved I had never experienced any form of hallucinations, visual or otherwise. I'd never seen a ghost, monster, hag, or any other sort of entity while I was paralyzed. It was only ever a sense of dread and total paralysis of the body. That changed about the same time I noticed the missing food and misplaced objects. I watched in horror as the rest of the man's body slowly passed into the room, tiptoeing as if he were creeping up behind someone in a cartoon. The man was utterly emaciated, almost skeletal in appearance, and covered in sores and pockmarks. He was stark naked and smeared in dirt and filth. I could do nothing but watch as he slowly inched ever closer towards me, until I could feel his hot breath upon my face. It smelled like the musty odor I sometimes detected in the living room. Not once did I see his expression change. He didn't even blink as he stared at me, and I could feel hatred radiating off of him like heat from a furnace. He just stood there, looking at me for what felt like hours. Eventually he turned around and slowly sneaked back out of the room, gently shutting the door behind him. A few minutes later I started to be able to move again, the paralysis wearing off as my body started to wake up properly. Things continued about the same for a while after that. Objects still went missing from time to time, the smell in the living room stayed just as musty as it ever was, and about every week or so I'd have another sleep paralysis incident. Of course, now every time I did experience sleep paralysis, I'd have to see my unwanted visitor again. I named him Jimmy, to try and reduce the terror a little bit. Putting a silly name to a horrifying face helped lessen my fear slightly. As far as sleep paralysis hallucinations went, Jimmy wasn't too bad once I started to get used to him. He never touched me or sat on my chest like some people's nightmares did, he just stood and stared. It was still deeply unpleasant, mind you, but I felt lucky that it was a consistent kind of unpleasantness at least. She picked up after a couple rings, sounding slightly exasperated. "Hello, this is Rebecca, who is this?" There was a long pause on the other end of the phone. "Hello?" I asked. "You need to get out that apartment, you're not safe." I honestly didn't have any response but to laugh. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked her between chuckles. "I think 311 is haunted." We asked around to some of the other residents, and apparently the last guy to live there just disappeared. Our best guess is that he must have died and his spirit just never left. My girlfriend is into some occult stuff, so she tried a cleansing ritual or something like that, but it didn't work. Things kept disappearing, and eventually we just decided to move. I hung up the phone. It was rude, sure, but I was just so shocked that I didn't know what to do. At the very least I began to understand why I got this apartment for so cheap. The next 2 days were spent researching. I checked out dozens of books on folklore and the occult from the local library, scoured paranormal internet forums, and even watched a few episodes of some cheesy ghost hunting TV show. I was determined to figure out a way to put the spirit of Michael Hansen to rest. The stories were all wildly different, with countless potential solutions to my problem. Some sources said salt was a surefire way to banish spirits, others said iron was a good ghost repellent, but most simply said I should give up and move. However, one myth piqued my interest. According to some beliefs, the spirits of the unquiet dead could be tied to objects from their life, binding them to the place where the object resided. If the object which their soul was bound to was destroyed, it freed their spirit and they could move on to the afterlife. I remembered the paintings. I had assumed that they were put there by the landlord, but it was just as possible that they were left behind by Michael. I arrived back to the apartment, determined to grab the paintings and burn them, laying Michael Hansen's soul to rest once and for all. I felt like some sort of hero, a badass monster hunter who saved the day with her intuition and a little bit of book smarts. One by one I pulled the paintings off the walls, putting them in a cardboard box. I made a mental note to buy some lighter fluid on the way to the empty lot where I planned to burn them. I approached the final painting, the one which showed a woman in a white dress beneath a tree. I pulled it off the wall and recoiled as the musty smell increased in intensity. Staring in confusion, I saw a small rectangular hole where the painting used to be, about 4 feet off the ground and 2 feet by 2 feet in length and width. I shuddered in fear, remembering that Michael's body was never found. Perhaps he was murdered, his corpse hidden in the walls by some unknown assailant. I nervously flicked on my flashlight, peered within the hole, and screamed. There was nothing romantic about seeing the clenched-tooth grimace of Michael Hansen, glaring at me with hate as he stood in the small section of hollow wall which he had been living in for the past 6 months.
Whew, that gave me chills. But hey, we're just getting started. The next one's sharper. You'll see.
Bobo was a cruel man, born with a black and twisted soul. But Bobo was also gifted. He was gifted with the love of all who saw his handsome face or heard his gentle voice. This was Bobo's game in youth. As horrible as it was, as he got older, his games got messier. Bobo got bored. They'd be served lavish meats, meticulously garnished and marinated. Midway through the meal, he'd tell them the truth. He'd tell them how they were eating their own children. Bobo played his games many times in the village. No one could stop him, or even bear a grudge against him. Who could hate his voice? A drunk. He must hang till death. Upon hearing this, the drunk sobered up and started sobbing and weeping, begging the judge for leniency for his daughter's murderer. Grabbing onto the judge's leg, he hollered, "Please! I swear my soul to you, spare him." With the drunk fell to the ground in relieved stupor, leaving the judge to think. The judge visited the house of an old woman. She had been a seamstress in her younger days, now she lived alone in her hut at the edge of the great forest. This isn't his end. For Bobo's magic still hasn't left him. You'll reach your hand to him. He'll bow down, and kiss your hand, like you were royalty. And one by one, he'll eat the fingers off your hand. For some reason, even when he can satisfy his hunger entirely, he never does. He'll just leave you, handicapped for the rest of your life.
Need a break? Too bad. These stories don't wait, and neither do we. Next one's worse, in the best way.
Witches are generally very quiet, introverted creatures. So the screaming children pounding on our doors and demanding candy, well, that just really isn't our style. The little witch costumes are always kind of cute, though. It's nice to be a role model for just one night. Vampires, on the other hand, love Halloween. Kids aren't usually out after dark, except for on this one night, and so the vampires crawl out of their hovels, or their crummy, downtown flats, to ooh and ah over the little children and their costumes. I can tell you're tense already, just thinking about that. Well, don't worry, our kind have a pact for Halloween. We don't touch children. Because of the nature of some of our population, we can't guarantee that children will always be safe. But on this one night, we make sure the kids can come out and have a good time without fear of losing a limb or worse. I was finally totally relaxed after what had amounted to a long, hellish week, and was really enjoying myself, when I heard a scraping at the window. "Hey, sweetheart, invite me in," he purred, his voice deep and smooth and hypnotic. "Don't call me sweetheart," I deadpanned, crossing my arms over my chest. He climbed in through the window and landed lightly on his feet, smiling at me. Smirking, more like it. "Seriously, what do you want? I'm having a perfectly lovely night in and I don't need you here to ruin it." He sighed, "You're no fun, you know." Then he became serious. "We have a problem down on the east side of the city." "What do you mean?" I heaved a put-upon sigh. Fine. Let me get my coat." And shut the window, "We're going out through the door, like civilized people." I turned to grab my coat, then thought better of it. I ran to the closet near the foyer and pulled out a black cloak, a bag, a pointed black hat, and a broom. I heard Gale muffling laughter behind his hand. "Wow, are you for real right now?" It only took me a moment to get us to the other side of town. Witches have a lot of ways of getting around. My favorite method is to manipulate reality, melt the reality we exist in and transfer to a reality where I'm at my target destination, then merge the two reality strands. Sci-fi fans would like you to believe that this is dangerous, but their fears are vastly overstated. There is nothing so mundane and easy to manipulate as time. Gale, however, was not nearly so used to this sort of magic. He crouched down with his hands clutching his head when we stopped. "What's wrong? Feeling a bit queasy, are we?" I asked. I was glad I had chosen a secluded area as my destination, that way nobody would bother us to ask if he was okay. "Look, Mom, it's a witch, a real witch," shrieked a little girl. She had a sparkly purple tutu, a pointed hat, and a very ornate wand that I surmised she had painted herself. "I see that, sweetie," said her mother. She winked at me and I laughed. "I just never knew you liked them, is all. I could get you one, if you want." He waggled his eyebrows at me and I gave him a look of total disgust. "Not like that. I'd just swipe one." Gale reappeared next to me while I was lost in thought and I just about shrieked. "Don't worry, I'll sniff them out," Gale replied. I shuddered a little at that. It's true, vampires have very keen senses, and his super hearing or super smelling might turn out to be useful in just such a situation, but it still weirdly grossed me out. Unnatural, that's what it is. The association is hard to explain. It's sort of like our version of government. It's a bit less restrictive, I guess. They don't have many rules. It's just that the rules they do have are very, very important. You really don't want to break them, trust me. Well, there will be an investigation, I'm sure. And once the association makes a decision, I'd guess it would be death. He glared at me. That is not funny. He stopped short just as we stepped onto J Street. He lifted his head and took a long sniff, like some kind of hunting dog. I could just picture him with ears and a tail. It was actually a cute thought. Shit. Is it a lot of blood? I mean, the smell is pretty strong, so there must be a significant, oh. His grin faded as he realized the implications of what he was saying. Well, maybe it isn't them after all. He nodded and started down the street with renewed vigor. Surely you don't want me to call you Ambrosia forever. I grimaced. Ambrosia is the name given to me by the Council of Witchcraft. It's symbolic but also practical. It binds me to the other witches in our community, and if I were to ever break our code, they could use it to subdue and restrain me. Plus, no witch gives out her real name. Our real names hold unbridled power over us, and to do so could very well mean suicide. I'll think about it, I answered. Hey, if you don't want to use that name, why don't you just join a coven instead? No. My voice came out much louder than it needed to be, but seriously, I would never dream of disgracing myself by joining a coven. Covens are for witches who are rejected from the council, and who are stuck in the Middle Ages. You know those pictures of witches you see, where they're a bunch of old, haggard women covered in boils and eating children? Yeah, those are the kind of crazies you get when you start a coven. Hard pass. Hold on, said Gale, holding up his hand. His head tilted to the left and he sniffed the air again. It's there. He pointed to a rather large house with the lights off. It didn't look like a super welcoming place, no Halloween decorations, no sign of any life. I wondered why the kids walked up to it. Other than the fact that, you know, kids are dumb and tend to do dumb things. Alright, let's go in. We made our way up the pathway and I stooped down in front of the door. After discovering the door was locked, I slipped a bobby pin from my hair and started to jiggle it around the lock. Come on, don't you have some kind of, like, door unlocking spell? Asked Gale. He was bouncing on his feet, eager to find the source of all the blood. Yeah, I don't use magic on something that's stupid. Picking a lock is easier and, honestly, faster. I heard a click and tried the handle again. This time it turned. Okay, let's go. We entered the house, prepared to search it from bottom to top in order to find the source of the blood, but it turns out we didn't have to. A few blood drops led us further into the house, past the dining room and into the kitchen, where we found what appeared to be the basement door ajar. As we approached the door, we could see a light and hear the faint sound of somebody crying. "That must be it," I said. I turned to Gale. "When we go down there, our primary goal is to get the kids out. Whatever has them, you hold it off while I grab the kids, okay?" "Well, it used a knife, so I would guess it's a rogue witch or wizard. Performing a dark magic ritual. You'll need to be careful, but we have an advantage. They aren't expecting a vampire." "Holy shit. He's human, isn't he?" Gale didn't bother whispering or concealing his voice. Everyone in the room turned to look at him, me included, and I glared. You'll notice that I haven't actually told you what the man looked like. The murderer. And there's a good reason for that. See, he was just so ordinary. When I first laid eyes on him, the scene seemed so absurd to me. He looked like a regular, middle-aged, balding salaryman. There was nothing sinister about him. Nothing that would indicate that he was fucked up. That he liked murdering children. So I watched Gale lunge at the man with something akin to relief. As Gale slammed the man into the wall, he dropped the child and she sat on the ground, sobbing behind her gag. I ran to her and grabbed her, dragging her back to the corner with her friends. I sat her down by her friends and started searching the floor frantically. I spotted her finger on the ground and grasped it, bringing it towards her. She was pale and hyperventilating, about to enter into shock. I placed her finger back in its rightful place and reached into my bag, grabbing out a handkerchief and a small blue vial. I wrapped the handkerchief around the hand and finger and breathed over it, mumbling a spell to myself as I did. I poured the blue solution onto her hand and let it soak into the cloth. I waited for a beat or two before removing it. She nodded, then shook her head. "Well, I'm not a real witch. I'm just pretending." "What is he doing to that man?" asked the pirate. I had a very good idea of what Gale was doing, but I decided to avoid that particular topic. I led them upstairs. I kept them distracted while we walked by the body of their friend. As we reached the door, I turned around and knelt down. I whispered a few words in each of their ears and watched as their eyes went blank. I turned back and looked at the dead child in the foyer. "Now what do I do with you?" I murmured. I stared for a moment, then walked back down to the basement. "Well, we need to pick up the other kid's body and get out of here, so if you could finish up." He nodded and grasped the man's face in both his hands. Straddling the body, he yanked hard and fast. The sound of his flesh distending and snapping was sickening. His body flailed a moment after the decapitation, but it didn't last very long. It was a relief when he stopped moving. I didn't want to think about the world housing that kind of human. We went upstairs and Gale lifted the child into his arms. He looked at me in confusion. "What do you want him for? Don't you think maybe we should just leave him here for the police to find?" I shook my head. "I can do you one better." I grabbed onto Gale and transported us back to my house, my plan already in place. "There's no hope for you, seriously." On the 10th line, I plunged my fingernail through my skin and into my artery, letting my blood drench the lid of the coffin. It seeped into the rune carvings and disappeared while my chanting continued. I could hear other voices joining me, now, voices from different times and spaces and existences. I finally recited the final, and 20th, line, my strength failing me. I let myself fall forward on the lid of the coffin, my blood still flowing freely from my wrist as I struggled to breathe. I was losing a lot of blood very quickly. If the ritual was going to work, it had to work now. I very vaguely became aware of being lifted off the coffin lid. I realized after a moment that Gale was cradling me, my wrist lifted to his mouth. He was licking my wound which, I realized, had closed when it came in contact with his saliva. Vampire saliva has many healing properties. Not that I appreciated it at that exact moment. Don't interfere, Gale. It was hard getting enough breath to speak. I had lost a dangerous amount of blood. You're a goddamn idiot, Ambrosia. Are you trying to kill yourself? You know, you could pick better ways to do it than to bleed out in front of a vampire. No ritual is so important that you endanger yourself like that. What the hell were you thinking? A bit of clarity was coming back into my head. I opened my mouth to retort when he and I both heard it. Hello. Is anybody there? We told him he hit his head. That we'd found him on the sidewalk and brought him to my place to see if he was okay. Gale offered to walk him home. It was getting late, now, and surely his parents were worried. Whoever thought that a vampire would be my type?
Something's still listening, and it wants more. Next story. Just don't say its name.
I've known my husband since high school. We were friends for the longest time before we started to date, which eventually led to our marriage. My mother-in-law has always been a precise person. Things needed to be perfect for her to be happy. If something looked off to her in the slightest, she had to fix it immediately. The only time she ever relaxed was when she was drunk, which happened seldom. That was her first mistake. Last Thursday, my mother-in-law sent out a message in the family group chat on my husband's side. She was hosting a gathering that Saturday at 6 p.m., 1800 hours, sharp. Her message was formal and typed out carefully, the opposite of how I write. My mother-in-law sure has tried to, though. She seems to think that since she's made everyone else in the family perfect, she can do the same with me, too. As soon as they settled, the guests began to drink. Nothing too heavy though. Mother-in-law would be upset if anyone misbehaved when it came time to eat. To most of our surprise, she poured herself a glass of wine when she sat down with us. My husband, who sat on the sofa beside me, whispered that he'd only seen his mother drinking 4 times in his entire life. When dinner time came around, my mother-in-law was full-on drunk. She slurred her words as she announced the meal she had prepared. Turkey, sausage, roasted peppers, mashed potatoes, and homemade gravy. It looked delicious. I scooped up portions of each onto my plate and made a quick escape from the kitchen to wash my hands. I didn't even notice the vial my mother-in-law was holding as I passed her. We finally left the house and were headed back to our own place. Though I do love a good get-together, that night was exhausting. I couldn't shake the feeling something was terribly wrong, though. I ignored it for the next couple of days, focusing only on work and keeping the house clean. Until one day I came home to my husband sitting on the couch in tears. His mother had passed away from some sort of unknown poisoning. I trust my husband and I know he trusts me too, but if I told him what I thought was planned to happen that night he wouldn't believe me. He'd probably hate me for even thinking his mother would try to hurt me.
Sleeping yet? Didn't think so. Next story's up. And yeah, it's worse. You're welcome.
Weak with shock, I filled the bath with hot water until it covered us both to our chins. I, of course, held his up, gripped by the curious notion that if I let go, he'd slip under and drown. Then things got weird. The bathtub, with its squalid water and terrible stench, became our cozy little love nest. Frankly, it was the best time we'd had together since he'd lost the key to our honeymoon hotel room and hadn't been able to rape me again that night. No one, not even family, came to the apartment door. My husband's boasts and tirades had alienated everyone, including the Grubhub and DoorDash delivery guys. I subsisted on peanut butter, bread, and my newfound peace of mind. My husband, of course, required nothing but a daily oiling to help preserve his drying skin. 2. No more of him asking for amour at 4 a.m. when I just started my period. Yes, romance blossomed in our secret hideaway. It was like putting a "Do Not Disturb" sign on our entire relationship. Perhaps, just perhaps, before I'm jailed, the cops will let us renew our vows at a funeral home or crematorium. I can just see his urn now, atop the wedding cake. Open up. Cops at the door threatening to kick it in. Better than ever, I shouted, pulling on my old wedding gown. Thank goodness, it still fit. Guess that was the silver lining to all the cottage cheese, tepid water and toast I'd eaten at my husband's insistence. Moving like lightning, I stuffed my husband into his tuxedo, pulled him to his feet and worked his mouth into a beaming smile. "The what?" the closest cop asked, finding his voice. From his badge, I could see he was a sergeant. "The limo. To drive to us to the wedding. We're renewing our vows." A female officer, mature and wise, pushed her way to the fore. "Sure, honey. It's downstairs waiting. We're the police escort. We'll be clearing the route." This irritated me. "Oh, so you think I'm crazy?" A long, black Cadillac pulled up. 2 grim men exited and removed my husband from the sergeant's arms. I began to squirm. For the first time since I killed my husband, something seemed off. "You mean we're riding separately? Never heard of that." "It's the latest trend," Bride magazine says, the policewoman replied. She tightened her grip. The 2 cops and the driver of the gray sedan wrestled me into the back seat. They strapped me in with a seat belt and wide leather straps. A gauzy hood came down over my head. I bit it with my teeth. A torn label flopped over. It read Property State Hospital. "We're not going to a chapel. You're committing me." "You'll have your own private room," the policewoman said. Her lip was bleeding and her cheek was red. "It's the same locked room you occupied after you hammered your first husband to death 10 years ago, the policewoman said. She adjusted the hood so it was easier for me to breathe. With a ball peen, that time. It all came back now, the secret I had tucked away, after they'd freed me on conditional release. My pervert dad. My volcanic anger. My bad taste for very bad men. I screamed. And kept screaming every moment of every day, for years and years. To ensure that my voice, and the voice of all mistreated women, was finally, truly heard.
Still here? Aw, look at you. Brave little meatbag. Too late to back down now. Next story's already watching.
He stared at me, his eyes wide. "There are ghosts in the basement, Mom." Hank was silent, watching me as I poked at the batter in the pan. "That's not true, is it?" I nodded, "Exactly. And no one has died in our house. We bought it brand new last year, remember? So, we can't have ghosts." "How do you know that no one has died in our house?" There was a pause. "No, Mom." I sighed impatiently. "Hank, your dad's downstairs, the lights will be on. Go on, there's no ghost, trust me." But Hank sat there, kicking his legs under the table, visibly uncomfortable. This had never been a problem in the past, and I couldn't think of any reason for it, aside from some silly horror story his friends might have told him at school. "No, Mom, don't." Hank jumped to his feet, dashing after me and gripping the hem of my apron. "Don't call Dad." His eyes welled up with tears. "I don't like him. I stared at him, taken aback. You don't like him? Why? Well, Hank sounded hesitant. Yesterday, after school, I went down to the basement to ask for some help with the pasta, and he was yelling at the lady. And then he hit her. I froze. What pasta? What lady? He hid his face in my apron and shook his head. I don't know. My husband was a stay-at-home dad and normally spent his time tinkering in the garage. His only responsibilities were keeping the house tidy and taking care of Hank after school. I always worked late and usually came home long after my son went to bed. Dad always has a new lady in the basement when I come home from school. I'm not allowed to go down there, but I hear them. He says I have to get my own dinner, but last night I forgot to turn off the stove and some water got on my arm. He pulled up his right sleeve, revealing a large area of scorched skin on his forearm. I stared at it, and then at my son in bewilderment, my throat closing up. What happened to the lady, Hank? I whispered. He wet his lips. I don't, she lives in the basement now. They all do. My blood ran cold. Stay here. I'm going to talk to your father. No. Hank grabbed my sleeve. You can't go, Mom. I have to, baby. Don't worry, the ghosts won't get me. I just need to find out what's going on. Hank crumpled to the floor, burying his face in his little hands. I'm afraid, he sniffled, I'm afraid that if you tell him, he'll make me return to my grave.
Anyway, let's lighten the mood with something fun and... Nah, just kidding. It gets worse. Hit it.
He said it louder. Did you know there's 1.5 gallons of blood in an average person? One of the girls at our lunch table looked at him in disgust, and looked away. Robert was a weird-ass kid. None of us were friends with him, and we didn't pay any attention to him, so it was a surprise to see his greasy self sitting at our table. His unwashed bangs covered his forehead, but a large patch of acne was still visible. His small, half-moon glasses made his eyes look like they're bulging out of his head. I told one of the security guards on what Robert kept saying, and they said he won't be eating lunch here anymore. But surprise, surprise, Robert returned the next day. Did you know Dash, he was knocked out of his seat by one of the kids. His chubby self hit the ground and his glasses broke on impact. Nobody stood up for Robert, not even the kids behind us. Everyone knew he was a total freak. Robert stood back up again, his nose was bleeding like a faucet. You can't hurt me, he choked out. The guy swung again and pushed him away from the seat. He backed up into another table and crashed into a group of guys. He got up, his clothes soaked in food, and hurried off. Did you know brain activity can last 10 minutes after you die, he said, then pointed again at one of the girls. I'd smile at you in those 10 minutes, did you know if you say some shit like that again I'll beat the shit out of you, one of the guys said, and stood up. Robert backed up, and chuckled. I'll fucking kill you, he screamed, and the guy jumped over the table. Robert's face met the ground in 10 seconds. Life went on without the creep at our table. But at the end of the day, we have to give credit where credit is due. It really did only take us 1 to 3 minutes to kill Samantha.
You're still tuned to Horror Slop. Frequency unknown. Stories endless. Let's spin the next nightmare.
I've been trapped in this bunker for 5 years. Please, is anyone out there still alive? By Richard Saxon. Daily Report, David Robert Jones. Time elapsed since the start of infestation, 1827 days. I was jolted back to consciousness, by the sound of a blaring alarm. The airlock had been breached, and I knew exactly why. Without getting dressed, I shot out of bed, and rushed towards The blast doors. There, equipped in a protective suit, with only a singular can of oxygen, stood Charles. He turned towards the exit, ripping a quarantine sign off the door. He nodded, but kept working on the door. In a matter of minutes, he would break through the seal, and leave the safety of our bunker. He sighed, "Don't try to stop me, this is my decision." He paused, and turned back around to face me. He hadn't shaved in a few weeks, and his eyes looked bloodshot. We hadn't seen the day of light in years, not since the infestation started, 5 years earlier. "I don't want to be alone." I sat back in my chair, and calculated how long the supplies could last me. Dried and canned foods, all meant to last a decade. Without Charles and the rest of the crew, it could keep me going for a lifetime. I tended to the daily maintenance tasks, and started my report. Though we'd long since lost contact with High Command, we still sent updates on day-to-day occurrences. I let my mind drift, contemplating if living inside this empty prison was worth it. My train of thoughts was quickly interrupted by movement on the cameras. "Let me in," Charles shouted. "I can't do that, Charles. You know the rules." "Please, I'm almost out of air." I could hear him struggling as the oxygen ran out. Despite his most valiant effort, he wouldn't be able to resist the temptation of removing his mask. After all, human instincts are hard to ignore. "I'm sorry, Charles. I wish you hadn't left," I said as he drew his last, agonized breath of tainted air. "If anyone receives this, please get me out of here." David Robert Jones, signing out. June 5, 2025. TCC.
Anyway, let's lighten the mood with something fun and... Nah, just kidding. It gets worse. Hit it.
I was an airline pilot for 30 years, and I have some stories to tell, by Healthy Review. Flying Toward Fate, A Pilot's Parable. Part 3. 1. The Island. There's a good reason most of the goings-on in the pointy end of the airplane are so seemingly shrouded in mystery. Firstly, in the rare event that a catastrophic failure occurs, there's usually no upside in letting people know. Yes, your safety may be marginally impacted overall, but, simply put, informing the nice folks in the back we lost one of our hydraulic systems and are just a few faulty valves from being uncontrollable doesn't seem to inspire the calmness we generally aspire to, at least in my experience. Secondly, and more apt in this account, it's because sometimes those goings-on are so inexplicable that a prudent pilot may be wiser to pretend nothing happened at all, lest he ends up flying a Prius for Uber. And so, most airmen, not unlike myself until now, and only then because of the anonymity this medium affords, float their way through their careers with a veiled, stifled, sense of terror about them. A sense a common man would never notice, but that a fellow aviator knows all too well. It's the sight of cold, darting eyes across an empty horizon or the single bead of sweat forming on an otherwise unfurrowed brow. It's not abject terror, never. It's the sound of an overly calm announcement from the captain after a spot of turbulence, or a cold, calculated nod between crew members as they both look to one another to affirm they're really seeing whatever that is out there. And a nod is all it will be, too, otherwise, the discussion might end up on a cockpit voice recorder. May 7, 1982, an emergency diversion to the Azores. For those who aren't aware, the Azores are an archipelago about 800 miles west of Portugal. Throughout aviation's brief history, the islands have proven to be an invaluable fuel stop for aircraft hopping from the States to Europe. As technology progressed and fuel endurance increased, these fuel stops were no longer necessary as contemporary jet aircraft could offer non-stop flights. In the 80s, any flight stopping over in the Azores was likely because of a fuel emergency that developed en route. "Find me a fix to the Azores," Captain Dunkirk said. "And it looks like you better make it snappy." "About a 110 heading will do it," I said. "But we aren't going to make it. They're over 400 miles away." We slowed, solemnly, to our best glide speed, which would give us the farthest gliding distance without power. Neither one of us could work up the courage to make an announcement to the passengers. Cruising at 41,000 feet, we were descending now at about 1,200 feet per minute. That's about 34 minutes of an eerily quiet ride to the waves below. Way too much time alone with thoughts about the finality of death and what, if anything, might lie beyond. So we didn't think. Like the private holding his arm and charging into battle, we both fastidiously scanned the horizon for a patch of dirt, recalculated our time to impact, and prepared the aircraft for an eventual ditching. Scan. Calculate. Scan. Calculate. Scan. I must have scanned the horizon 1,000 times and even convinced the captain to change course momentarily to scan the areas we couldn't see. Then, descending through 10,000 feet and with 8 minutes and 18 seconds left to impact, I saw the impossible. A small island off our right flank sporting a long, beautiful runway. It was well within our gliding range. With an appreciation for life only those who have faced certain, unavoidable death have experienced, we banked the TriStar toward the island and made our gliding approach. "I'm going to look for someone," the captain said. "No, stay with the ship." "I'll go," I replied. He nodded. With the TriStar and the pristine runway at my back, I walked for what seemed like hours until I approached a huddle of small aircraft hangars. Then I heard it, the squealing and cawing. Chimps. Hundreds of them flocked, pulling and prodding at my clothes and gibbering wildly. I laughed, awestruck. But that was only the beginning. Growing tired of being prodded, I walked away when one chimp distinguished himself. Larger than the others, he wore a tattered green shirt and darted in front of me as I turned from the crowd. The other chimps quickly encircled us, and I quickly realized this must be a leader of sorts. I jumped in the tanker but was quickly stopped by a chimp with whom I had not yet been introduced. Despite this, he had no qualms about showing me who was in charge and insisted on driving. At that rate, who was I to argue? As we drove, the TriStar's hulking frame grew closer on the horizon and before long the fuel tanker, the leader, and a handful of his compatriots were situated under our jet's wing. I motioned for them to wait, and just as I turned toward the cabin door I heard him. "Come back for us. We'll be put in the nut house, you know that, right?" The captain said. "They'll lock you up and throw away the key." He ran his hands through his hair as he spoke, stuttering. "Best to give it here," he said as he reached for the map. "Plus, if they find out we didn't find that fuel leak before we left Atlanta, we're both cooked, you understand?" It was a different time. I understood. "We tell nobody and get the thing fixed in the Azores, got it?" "Got it." He tore the map into confetti. I felt a pang in my chest as he sprinkled them into the bin. It was an awful thing. Truly awful. The worst was I still knew the coordinates, even after Captain Aham tore them to shreds. Even after all this time. I just never spoke up. None of us did. Until now, N35°8W 47°28'. More to come, that's enough for now.
Need a break? Too bad. These stories don't wait, and neither do we. Next one's worse, in the best way.
I was born on an island that only really had one rule. The kind that wasn't spoken but lived in people's posture. The way their mouths tightened. The way their eyes avoided a certain part of the sea. I can't remember a single adult ever naming it. Not even once. And if you said something about it, even by accident, someone would shut it down immediately. Not angrily. Just, firmly. Like flicking a candle out. It wasn't forbidden in the way dangerous things are forbidden. It was deeper. Like the island didn't want to be spoken of. And the people here had agreed to let it be. Our island wasn't big. You could walk across it in a few hours if you didn't stop. There was the village near the western bay, with its stone paths and wood-slatted houses and the small church where we held market on Sundays. A few scattered farms, a fishing dock, and the old watchtower from before my time that no one used anymore. It was quiet. Steady. The kind of place where every door creaked the same way and you knew who'd passed by just from the sound of their cough. The trade boat came once a week, usually just before noon. We never saw where it came from. It always arrived from the mist. It brought flour, salt, oil, iron tools. Letters sometimes, though no one in my family ever got any. It left with barrels of fish and boxes of preserved vegetables. No one ever left with it. There were 5 of us who couldn't leave it alone, me, Jonah, Sam, Eli, and Nathan. We were kids like any others, too much energy, not enough fear. We ran barefoot through the brush, built slingshots from driftwood, dared each other to knock on the widow's door. We spent hot days pretending to be soldiers and cold nights pretending we weren't scared of ghosts. We stole things, but nothing important, apples, candles, once a bottle of wine we didn't even like. We were just loud, restless boys. And then there was me. I don't know what I was in that group. I guess I was the one who remembered. The one who carried it longest. We'd talk about it only when we were sure no one else was listening. Maybe it's a ruin, Eli once said. Like, people used to live there but something happened. We didn't speak of it often. And when we did, it was always with that half-serious tone kids use when they're testing how far they can push something without making it real. But over time, the idea started to settle. Not in our mouths, but in our bones. Like it had been waiting there all along. We didn't plan it then. But I think we all knew we would. No one asked where. We all knew. Jonah still didn't look up. 2 mornings. Before sunup. We didn't bring much. A couple flasks of water. A loaf of bread wrapped in a cloth. Some rope. A pocket knife none of us could use right. Eli brought his father's compass. The face was cracked, and the needle had a habit of drifting even when you held it steady, but he brought it anyway. Sam brought a hammer, for some reason, though he never said why. As we got farther out, the shape of the island came into view, slowly, like it was pushing through fog we hadn't noticed before. I'd seen it all my life, but only from shore. Now, from the water, it felt different. Bigger. Heavier. The trees formed a jagged silhouette against the sky, and the hills behind them looked like sleeping animals just starting to stir. Fins, Sam said, and he said it too calmly, like he was trying not to cause a stir. We all looked. Just to the right of the boat, something slid under the surface. Long, smooth. It passed without sound. Then another. And another. Eli leaned forward. How can you tell? Jonah didn't answer. He just started rowing faster. So did Nathan. Neither of them said a word, but the skiff began to lurch forward harder with each pull. Sam reached down for the hammer in his bag and gripped it like it would make a difference. The boat started to wobble with the force of the strokes. Water splashed. The nose tilted. I tried to stay calm, but the air around me had gone thin, and every muscle in my body was bracing for something I couldn't see. The island was close now, close enough to see the rock line clearly. No dock. No paths. Just broken shoreline and thick brush that came almost down to the water. A crooked tree leaned out over the water near a narrow stretch of beach, barely wide enough to stand on. It looked untouched. Uninviting. We didn't argue. We moved. One by one, the others crashed onto the beach behind me. Crawling. Dragging. Coughing up seawater. The skiff was already gone, either swallowed by the reef or drifting, half-flooded, back into the mist. We stood there, shivering, dripping, catching our breath. One by one, we looked at each other, counting. 5 of us. No one missing. No one hurt, at least not badly. It took a few seconds before anyone spoke. It almost looked like it. Same crooked tree leaning out over the water like it was eavesdropping. Same cluster of black rocks jutting up along the curve of the cove. The same soft slope leading into the tree line beyond. Even the shape of the shoreline felt familiar, like we'd looped through time instead of space. Jonah turned in a full circle, scanning the trees and the shore and then the water again. "We didn't go anywhere," he said. His voice didn't sound angry. It sounded resigned. The air was different as we climbed. Heavy and warm, like the weather had changed without warning. The trees swayed gently, but the grass up on the slope moved just a little too much. We'd only made it about 30 or 40 paces up the trail when Nathan came to a stop. At first, I thought he was just catching his breath. But then I noticed where he was looking, up the slope, toward the tall grass hugging the hillside. She was so close. A very tall woman. That's when I realized what had hooked in my brain. Everything around her moved, but she didn't. Not even a twitch. I didn't understand why it made my stomach twist at first. It wasn't exaggerated. It wasn't monstrous. It was subtle. Just wrong. Her mouth stretched into what should have been a smile, but the shape was off. The corners bent down instead of up, like someone had tried to mimic it from memory and gotten the geometry wrong. But the rest of her face, the parts that move when you smile, those were perfect. The cheeks lifted. The skin around her eyes crinkled. That mismatch was worse than anything else. Her eyes were kind. I can tell you this, if I'd known then what I know now about that woman, I would have turned and swum back out into the water. I would have taken my chances with the sharks. Gladly. She raised her arm. "Why is she pointing at us?" Sam asked, barely audible. Nobody answered. I kept watching her finger. Something felt off. The angle. It wasn't quite right. Eli squinted, stepping half a pace forward. "Wait," he murmured. "I don't think she's pointing at us." I looked from her finger to her face. He was right. Her eyes weren't on us. They were aimed just above our heads. Her arm cut across the air in a straight line, not to us, but over us. That's when I felt it, that slow pull in my gut. The primal feeling that something was behind me. We turned. All at once. We didn't speak. They didn't either. Just stared, expressionless. Like they were waiting for something. The air had changed. I glanced back at the woman. No longer pointing. That contradiction, grief twisted into joy, settled in her face like it had always belonged there. Her eyes were on us now. Not the doubles. It didn't sound human. It didn't sound like anything that should exist. We hit the ground instantly. Hands to our ears. The sound wasn't just loud, it was inside us. In our bones. Our teeth. Our skulls. Sam was yelling something, but I couldn't hear it. All I could hear was her. No fade. No echo. Just, gone. I want to go back, Eli said behind us. His voice cracked halfway through. We shouldn't have come here. We need to leave. I think we are home, Nathan muttered, but it came out wrong. No one agreed. No one even looked at him. Because whatever this place was, it only looked like home. We had no boat. No choice. So we moved inland. There wasn't a conversation about it. No group decision. Just a quiet understanding that staying where we were felt worse than pushing deeper into the island. We didn't know what we were looking for, maybe shelter, maybe sense, but doing nothing seemed like asking for whatever came next. And these felt like copies. Imitations. Like something had tried to recreate them from memory and missed the proportions. Too many knots. Branches that twisted back toward the trunk. Bark that felt like damp cloth when your hand brushed past it. What the hell was that? He asked. As we moved, the forest didn't grow thicker. It grew darker. The light filtering through the trees lost its sharpness. Not just shade, like the sunlight itself had started to dim before it reached the branches. The air pressed in again. Not sharp, like on the beach. Heavier. Like something watching had started to breathe. Eventually, the trees broke into another clearing. The grass here was shorter, yellowed and dry, crunching underfoot. And in the middle of it stood a house. None of us spoke at first. What do you mean? I asked. He didn't answer right away. He walked a few steps closer, squinting at the frame around the door. Then to the woodwork under the windows. We followed, hesitant. None of us wanted to be near the place, but no one wanted to let Nathan go alone either. The door was already cracked open, just a few inches. Nathan hesitated anyway, like something might still reach out and shut it. Nothing did. So he pushed it open the rest of the way. Inside, the light was dim and orange-tinted, like it was filtering through the wrong kind of glass. The hallway was narrow. A coat rack on one side. Faint scuff marks on the floor. A chair in the corner that looked familiar, though I couldn't say why. They were of his family. His parents. His sister. Him. But everything was reversed. His dad's watch was on the wrong wrist. His sister's birthmark had switched sides. The smiles looked normal at first, until you stared too long, too symmetrical, too wide. I want to go, Eli said behind me. His voice was barely there. None of us answered. We just kept looking. The room held us. Not physically, but in that way a nightmare does, where the air feels thick and stepping backward might wake something up. We weren't frozen. Just, slow. Careful. Sam moved toward the painting above the mantel, staring at it like he expected it to blink. Every head snapped around. Sam ran up the stairs two at a time, Eli and I close behind. They creaked under us like normal stairs, nothing theatrical, nothing dramatic, but every groan from the wood felt too sharp. Like the house was responding. When we reached the bottom, Jonah wasn't there. We found him just outside, a few steps off the porch, arms crossed. We stood there, all four of us, facing the house like it might give something back. The open door gaped in front of us, cold air leaking out like it didn't belong to this place. No one replied. The porch creaked. He stepped forward slowly, one hand brushing the frame like it grounded him. He looked rested. Calm. His clothes were the same, but the fit seemed off, like they belonged to a version of him just slightly smaller, or built differently. He blinked. Squinted at us. Then frowned, puzzled. Eli was the first to speak. "Where the hell did you go?" Nathan tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "I was upstairs." "We checked upstairs," I said. "Every room." "I saw you," he said. "Through the railing. You were in the hall. You just walked off." I was watching his hands. He stepped down from the porch. "Are we going?" he asked. Same voice. Same face. But the rhythm was off by a beat. Too calm. Too smooth. Jonah walked up front. Sam stayed beside me. Eli and Nathan trailed behind us, a little slower, not too far back at first. We froze. None of us looked back. So we ran. Branches whipped our arms. Roots caught our feet. The path bent the wrong way more than once, and every tree looked like one we'd already passed. But we kept moving, pushing forward through the tightening forest until the trees finally broke open again and we saw it, the dock, warped and crooked, half sunken at the far end. A boat was tied to it. Not the one we'd taken, but something older. Narrower. Still afloat. We waited. A few more seconds passed. Then we heard it. A scream, ragged and sharp, echoing through the trees like it didn't belong to a voice but something breaking. Not words. Just pain. She walked slowly out from the bend of the clearing, circling into view. Cradled in her arms was Eli. He was still screaming. Her face was fixed on us. Not Eli. Not the forest. Just us. Her eyes never left ours, like she wanted us to see everything. And we did. That same downward smile carved her mouth into a deep, strained curve. It looked like the expression had been sculpted into her face with wire, pulled tight and wrong. But her eyes told a different story, soft, glassy, full of warmth, like she was watching something beautiful unfold. And still, she looked at us. Like we were the ones she was holding. But we all took a step anyway. I did. I felt my foot move before I meant it to, like something in me couldn't stand still and watch. Then we heard it. Subtle. Quiet. Like a thick branch snapping underfoot. His head lolled against her shoulder. His arms dangled at his sides, empty of fight. She didn't stop smiling. She held him there, still watching us, her eyes locked onto ours like she wanted to see what we'd do next. Her fingers brushed his back in slow, meaningless circles, like she was soothing him to sleep. Jonah stepped backward first. Then Sam. I followed. I didn't even think, I just moved. The boat scraped against the rock as we pulled it into the water. Nathan hadn't spoken. I looked at him once, just once, and wished I hadn't. We climbed into the boat. She was still standing at the edge of the trees, Eli's body limp against her chest. One arm wrapped around him like he was hers, and the other lifted slowly. She waved. None of us touched the oars at first. The tide pulled us gently, like the sea itself was too tired to fight. The sun had almost slipped beneath the horizon, casting everything in that strange, copper light that makes the world feel unreal, like you're seeing it through memory instead of your own eyes. Jonah finally took one oar, Sam the other. I sat in the middle, arms locked around my knees, staring at the ripple patterns trailing behind us. I don't remember when we lost sight of the mirrored island. I just remember the moment the real one came into view. But we didn't come back whole. People from the village. Parents. A few older brothers. A grandmother with her arms folded tight. They weren't shouting or pacing or scanning the horizon. They just stood there, like they'd been waiting. The boat scraped against the sand. Hands reached out, my father, Sam's mother, Jonah's uncle. They helped us out without a word, their eyes flicking from face to face, counting. When they didn't find Eli, no one said it out loud. They just knew. His mother began to cry, quiet at first, then sharp and shuddering. His father stood behind her, unmoving, staring past us at the horizon like he was still hoping to see his son come into view. One of the older villagers, maybe the priest, maybe just someone who'd done this before, put a hand on her back and gently led her away. She didn't resist. She just let herself be led, walking like someone made of paper. His mother rushed forward next, throwing her arms around him, clutching him so hard it looked painful. She was crying too, but it was different. Her hands twisted in the back of his shirt, but her face stayed tense, like she was trying to convince herself this was really him. Like she already knew she'd have to let go again. Nathan smiled. His smile stayed in place, but it didn't settle right. The corners of his mouth began to pull down instead of up. At first it looked like a twitch. Then it kept going, bending further, stretching the muscles in his face into that same strained expression we'd seen on her. A smile that was trying to mimic joy, but failing at the geometry of it. He just stood there, shoulders low, his eyes still on his mother. They held him under until the waves stopped moving around them. Or if we left him there, alive, watching us walk away. Sometimes I think what came back with us wasn't pretending. I think it believed it was him. By the next day, no one even said his name.
Something's still listening, and it wants more. Next story. Just don't say its name.
I don't know what came back from the woods. But it wasn't Max. I live alone in the northern part of Vermont. Not deep wilderness, but rural enough that my nearest neighbor is half a mile down the road, and the forest behind my house goes on for miles. I moved out here after my divorce, hoping for some quiet, some peace. Just me, my old dog, and a bit of land to call mine. It was just past sunset. We were out back, him sniffing around while I stacked firewood. Then he froze, ears up, tail stiff, and bolted into the tree line like something had called him. I shouted, but he didn't even hesitate. Just vanished between the birches. On the fifth night, just past 3 a.m., I heard scratching at the back door. My heart damn near exploded. I grabbed the flashlight, ran downstairs, and there he was. Sitting on the porch like he'd just gone for a stroll, dirty, tail thumping weakly against the boards. Max! I shouted, tears already blurring my vision. Jesus, Max, where the hell did you go? He wagged his tail harder and leaned into my chest when I opened the door. His fur smelled like wet leaves and mildew, but I didn't care. I dropped to my knees and hugged him. He didn't lick my face. Max always licked my face. I chalked it up to exhaustion. It took me a day to realize something was wrong. Sometimes I'd find him sitting in the hallway, perfectly still, staring into the corner. Other times I'd catch him watching me sleep. Not curled up by the bed like usual, but sitting upright in the doorway. Perfect posture. Head tilted. Silent. At night, I heard him moving. Pacing. His claws tapping across the hardwood. But every time I got up to check, he'd be in the same spot, laying by the fireplace, breathing slow and steady. And then there was the thing with his reflection. Max used to hate mirrors. If he caught his reflection in the TV screen, he'd bark and back away. I noticed it one night when I was brushing my teeth. I glanced at the bathroom mirror and nearly dropped the toothbrush. Max was sitting behind me in the doorway, unmoving, staring directly into the glass. I tried to get him to look away. Called his name. Snapped my fingers. Just that steady, vacant gaze. I moved closer and waved my hand in front of his face. Finally, he blinked, slowly, like it was an afterthought, and turned his head toward me. For a second, I could have sworn his pupils were too big. Too wide. Too human. I didn't sleep that night. Just standing there. Like a statue. It came back the next morning. He got up at 2:14 a.m. I heard the back door creak open. I grabbed my flashlight and slipped outside after him. Max was moving fast. Through the brush. No hesitation. No noise. I kept my light low and my distance close, following the sound of his steps. He led me deep into the woods, past the creek, past the old hunting blind, into a part one hadn't explored before. The trees thinned out, and I saw movement ahead. Or maybe in. His eyes reflected the flashlight beam, like an animal's. But instead of the usual green-blue shine, they were red. Dull and heavy, like blood soaked through paper. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just smiled. At least, it looked like a smile. His lips peeled back too far. Teeth too white. Too even. Then he stood and walked around the pit and disappeared into the trees. I didn't follow. This morning, there were 2 bowls of food gone. 2 spots in the snow melted where bodies had slept. Sometimes I catch him looking into corners again. Not with curiosity. Like he's waiting. Not a dog bone. A finger. I don't know what came back from the woods. But it isn't Max. When I got back home, I set them up everywhere. 1 in the hallway, 1 in the living room, 2 in the backyard, 1 pointed at Max's bowl, and 3 around the perimeter of the woods. I linked them to a basic monitor on my desk and kept the feed up all night. Max watched me while I installed them. Just sat there on the floor, staring, as if he already knew what I'd see. I watched the feeds until my eyes burned. I leaned forward in my chair. Then the footage glitched. Their limbs didn't move right. They glided toward the camera. That too wide grin. Teeth too flat, too many of them. Like something had drawn a dog from memory but never seen one up close. I checked the camera the next morning. The lens had been smashed in. The mount was twisted, almost melted. No footprints. Just more dirt. Another mound at the treeline. This one was shaped like a child. Small. Curled. I didn't dig. I kept watching the footage every night. It kept getting worse. Max left the house at the same time each night. 1:23 a.m. exactly. Sometimes he stood still. Other times he disappeared for hours before coming back soaked in mud, paws black with something thicker than soil. The shapes in the woods came closer each time. The fourth night, they were on the porch. I didn't see how they got in. No doors opened. No windows broke. One frame they were gone, the next, they were standing in my living room. That was last night. This morning, all the cameras were gone. Not broken. Like wrought and iron. Like the inside of something dead. Not a paw print. A human hand. Long fingers. Sharp nails. But pressed into the wall at shoulder height, as if whoever left it had crawled out from inside the floor. None of them will. And I know they're coming back tonight. They let me see them. They wanted me to. Because now I've started to hear the whispering, even when I'm awake. Not from outside. He hasn't moved in 2 hours. He hasn't blinked once. And I think he's smiling again. Because I don't think I can stay here tonight. But I also don't think they'll let me leave.
You're still tuned to Horror Slop. Frequency unknown. Stories endless. Let's spin the next nightmare.
I don't feel sad, but I've not felt sad before, only to realize I was festering in a pit of sorrow way deep down, too far down for it to have just happened. Even still, if this is sadness, it's different than it's ever been. Yesterday, I went to catch a matinee and ran out of the house without locking the door. I know I didn't lock it because halfway through the drive, the thought hit me like an 18-reeler. I've gotten into the habit of saying out loud, "I'm locking the door now," when doing so, because I know I can trust myself, or at least I thought I could. I turned back around to fix my mistake, kicking myself for missing the previews. After thinking about those stairs again, I turned the knob only to feel resistance. The door was locked, but I know I didn't lock it. I didn't say I locked my door, and I'd remember my words. But unless my cats locked it for me, I did it. Right? It wasn't until I went to hang up my keys that I noticed it. The food. The flimsy Tupperware container of olives, the half-eaten cornicons, the little paper tray I had left on the dining room table, they were now stacked on the kitchen counter. The tray had been emptied. The containers were sealed. The table had been wiped clean. I didn't do that. I know I didn't do that. The air in the room changed, like someone had just exhaled after holding their breath for a little too long. My chest tightened. I glanced around, eyes darting toward corners, toward vents, toward the closet down the hall. I was suddenly aware of the sound of the fridge humming and how every other noise in the house had gone quiet. Eventually, I sat on the edge of the couch, shoes still on, keys still in hand. My gaze drifted to the stairs. I stared at them for a long time. Then I stood up and walked toward them, slowly. I counted, aloud this time. 1, 2, 3, each step creaked underfoot, but only slightly, like it was trying not to be heard. 4, 5, 6, my skin prickled. The hallway behind me felt too still. 7, 8, I paused. My foot hovered above the next step. I knew, somehow, that it should be the landing. But it wasn't. I looked up. There was still another step above me.
Sleeping yet? Didn't think so. Next story's up. And yeah, it's worse. You're welcome.
I had my first lucid dream at age 9. I wandered around, in and out of the cobwebby houses. Although the streets were empty, the houses usually had a few ghosts floating around. There were a few children, but they were mostly old people, in various stages of decay. They never hurt me, nor did they speak. They just floated. Sometimes they'd follow me, but I never felt threatened. I didn't think much of the dream, until I had it again a few weeks later. And again, a few weeks after that. I never did much. I'd walk around, go through the stuff in the houses looking for treasure, throw rocks, break bottles, that kind of thing. The fourth time I had it, there was someone else wandering the streets, too. The older we got, and, if I'm going to be honest, the more video games we played, we started to get bored in our foggy dreamland. We started hunting the ghosts, experimenting with how we could subdue them. We made up eventually, but the fight soured a pastime that was already losing its allure. But, the older we got, the less frequently we had the dreams. Slowly, they started to fade from our memories. I haven't told Chota about it yet. I don't know if I ever will. I was so surprised to be back in the decaying neighborhood that at first all I did was circle one of the cul-de-sacs while yelling things like, "Hello," and "I'm back." "Dada!" I cried, rushing to him. I spread my arms to embrace him before remembering that here, he wouldn't be solid. "Dada, how are you here?" In the quiet that followed, I bounced from foot to foot like an excited child, my chest filled with longing. All I wanted to do was hug him, but I knew it wasn't possible. Yes, Dada, it was me. Me and Chota both. But we were just playing a game. It's just a dream, Dada. You're just a dream.
Still with us? Good. That last one was just the warm-up. Let's go deeper.
Has your husband been standing still? By Steak Lizard. I don't know what he'll do. Let me in, let me find him, she said, her muffled voice sharpening while her palm drummed on the door. He stands still. So I searched my apartment with the crowbar I kept under the sheets in the linen closet. No one was in the front rooms, with their windows facing the street. I had been there all day, so it was impossible for anyone to have broken in that way. When I left the kitchen and crossed by the front door again, I saw that the woman had shoved a piece of paper in my door like a takeout menu. It was a torn envelope, like something pulled crumpled from the trash, and had written on it the words, "Listen. Please." Then I heard her whisper from low down on the door, even below where I had kneeled to pull at the scrap of paper. The whispering stopped and I realized I was barely breathing. I was still kneeling and my knees were beginning to get sore. "Are you still there?" the whispered voice asked. I didn't answer. He's gotten really skinny, and goes through tubes of high SPF sunscreen whenever he is called out to a site, so now he's white as an electric socket. He can suppress his presence and take away your intuitive sense that another person is nearby. He's practicing, he's getting better, he knows where your eyes land, and the spaces they slide over. "Go away!" I screamed, before retreating to the farthest corner of my apartment away from the front door. It took me a while to calm down, with some TV and all the lights on. I didn't pay attention to the show, but told myself that the woman at the door had a mental illness and a persecution complex and she wanted to pull me into her delusion. "You." I said, "Sir." I added, "You need to leave." At the threshold between hardwood and tile I looked down at my hands on the floor, and when I looked up he was gone. But it was only for an instant, because suddenly I could see him again just in front of me. He hadn't moved. My eyes had let him go and struggled to find him again, like he wasn't where I had expected, or if I had somehow forgotten him. The arms holding me up shook so violently that I pitched forward, landing on the side of my face with a smack. I landed right at his feet, but didn't touch him. Pushing back on the heels of my hands, I rolled backwards and slammed into the cabinet behind me, hard enough that I heard the fiberboard crack inside the door. I could crawl by him now, but first watched him for any sign of movement. He was in a khaki t-shirt that didn't quite match the wood cabinetry or stand out from the white refrigerator at his back. Nor were his dark pants much of a match for the brushed chrome of the dishwasher, though I could see he had a sliver of something shimmery silver, like a lanyard loop, hanging out from his pocket. I don't know how he could have disappeared from my sight. But he didn't seem to notice me. I strained to keep an eye on him over my shoulders as I crawled past, until I couldn't move slowly any longer. I scrambled to my feet, tumbling into a standing position, then into a headlong run, where I couldn't tell my heartbeats from the pounding of feet on the floor. After struggling with the lock, I finally squeezed through my front door and shut it behind me without looking back. The police came, searched my apartment, found no one. I tried to explain that he might still be there, that they just hadn't seen him. But they wouldn't come back in with me. They wouldn't search the park either. They were annoyed I wouldn't go back inside, but eventually left. She turned off her headlights and suddenly the feeling I had ignored, in favor of her serene understanding of my situation, could no longer be ignored. I was struck dumb with fear, my sore muscles protesting at being called back to alert. Had I met a couple working together? I looked around with my meteor eyes. There were men standing in strange shapes, pressed against the cinder blocks, and standing in the mud at bent angles, and even across the street, holding themselves straight. I see them everywhere now, she whispered. There are so many of them standing still.
Still here? Aw, look at you. Brave little meatbag. Too late to back down now. Next story's already watching.
Unable to transcribe sleep talking. At this point I was more than a little freaked out. I live alone, and I couldn't think of an even moderately likely explanation for what I'd recorded. I lay in bed, watching YouTube videos until around 2:15 a.m., then set my phone down to wait the last little bit in the darkness. Laying in my bed in the pitch black was extremely unnerving. I had the overpowering sensation that something was watching me, though I told myself that I'd be feeling that regardless of what was actually happening. Then my door opened. I lay there for a few moments, trying to convince myself that I'd made up whatever I'd heard. Then I turned to look at my bedroom door, the door I always keep shut while I sleep. It was hanging open. I swung my legs out, grabbed a baseball bat from under my bed in my right hand, and held out my phone's camera in my left. Then I turned on my bedroom light before beginning to walk through my house. They're searching my house right now, but they say they haven't found evidence of anything. I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight, but it won't be here.
Whew, telling gave me chills. But hey, we're just getting started. The next one's sharper. You'll see.
We have this urban legend in my city called the Wrong Way Man. Supposedly, you might see him standing on the side of the road when you're driving. Some say it's always when you're on your way home. I've seen pictures of the Wrong Way Man. They circulate among us by text message. They circulate among students, workers, friends, and family here. Oddly, I've never seen any of those pictures posted online. I'm not sure if it's because of fear, because those who've taken the pictures want to perpetuate the mystique of our local urban legend, or because of something else. I was pretty sure those pictures had been a hoax, just someone dressed up as the Wrong Way Man. Maybe it was the same person every time. As far as what the wrong way man looks like, he wears his tattered clothing backwards, usually a flannel shirt and jeans. His painted smiling face looks eerily realistic, until he turns to the side and you can see it's a smooth surface. It seems that he shaves his hair off, paints a face over the back of his head, and puts a shoulder-length wig on that covers up his real face. Those who I've met who claim to have spotted the wrong way man say they waited a week before driving home, staying over at a friend's house or a hotel and not even bothering to go home to pack a suitcase. I've also heard, though, that you need to wait a month. The common consensus seems to be, if you see him while driving home, don't finish the drive home. Turn around, go somewhere else, and wait for at least a week. It was Katie who spotted him. I had never seen someone dressed as the wrong way man in person. Pictures, sure. But never in person. My foot was shaking as I eased up on the gas. It was dark, nearing midnight dark, and there were either no streetlights or they were off. My car's headlights lit him up. On the side of the road, he was facing us. Actually, he had his back to us. That painted face was facing us. The jeans and flannel shirt and wig were all turned our way as well. His arms and legs looked wrong. They were shoved down in his clothing the opposite way. I wanted to be amused, but I was alarmed. Then he was gone. Lost to the darkness. I picked up speed. He hadn't been walking, but somehow I was worried he would come after us too quickly. I glanced at her, and soon we both started laughing. Katie and I decided that the person dressed as the wrong way man must have left the shoulder of the road for the surrounding woods. The idea of them hiding in the woods as we drove by again made me feel like I had spiders crawling over my flesh. Katie and I tried to laugh it out, and we tried talking about other things, but both of us were pretty scared. We couldn't stop chatting about everything and nothing or glancing out the windows or into our side mirrors. We turned into my subdivision. Then we turned onto my street. As soon as we turned onto my street, we started to go backwards instead of forwards. I stopped the car. Both of us were looking down. The car was in drive. I took my foot off of the brake and put it onto the gas pedal again. The houses, familiar houses I saw every day when coming home, were moving away from us. Maybe something's wrong with my car, I said. But when I tried driving forward again, I looked to the side and then in the rearview mirror. We were not moving. Not according to those views. In front of us, the houses receded every time I put my foot on the gas, but from the side and rear it appeared that we were standing still. "Let's get out of here," Katie said. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Put it in reverse." It was when Katie and I had stopped the car and were debating getting out that we spotted someone coming towards us on the sidewalk. They were approaching us from the front of the vehicle, so I'm not sure how accurate the distance was. It seemed like they were already about 20 feet away. I don't know why it took me so long to realize this, maybe it was because I didn't want to, but I recognized my neighbor by the back of his head and by his body shape, which was somewhat atypical. I'd seen him often stooped working in his garden while I was driving by. When he got closer, he stopped. Then he began shouting, "M'plaît. M'plaît," over and over again. Standing stock still. His back to us. Only later would I realize he had been saying, "Help me," in reverse. He stopped shouting. Now that my window was down, I could hear his body creak and snap. Blood poured out of fissures as the joints of his arms and legs changed drastically. When Mr. Nelson's head twisted all the way around towards us, I was sure that I saw the light go out of his eyes. Then, whatever had taken over Mr. Nelson made a first step forward with the new architecture of his body. Katie and I both began to scream at that first step. I rolled up the window as Mr. Nelson loped around on strange, inhuman legs. His kneecaps and elbows had become stretched and exaggerated from being reversed. I put my foot on the gas, with the car still in reverse, and through the front windows we seemed to be careening forward. Even though a glance out the sides or in the rear view showed us to still be stationary, we slammed into Mr. Nelson. To the sides and rear, there was no indication of the car rising and falling. I did not see a lump appear behind us. I kept my foot on the gas, still going forward in reverse. They and their house vanished in the sides and rear of the vehicle, which were, again, still stuck near the street's entrance. "Keep going," Katie yelled. "They're going to catch up with us." Ahead, I saw my own driveway. Someone that looked like me was talking to another person with a painted face. The painted face nodded. Up and down it nodded like a real face would do. Then, when I saw the wig shuffle and move seemingly on its own, I realized that the true face under that wig was talking. Moving its lips. Breathing. The wrong way man was talking to me or someone who looked like me. Katie and I both began to change. I heard some of my bones break. I felt it a moment later. Like the reverse of lightning before thunder. "Keep your head back," I yelled as I strove to keep my head pinned against my seat. "Don't let it twist around. No matter what happens to the rest of our bodies, we can't let it kill us." Make a U-turn, I thought. What was it my grandpa said about life and how if you didn't know what to do, you could always make a U-turn? I didn't glance out the sides or rear. I gunned it, heading back towards where we had come from. We passed him and drove out of the neighborhood. I blacked out almost at once, but Katie tells me she retained consciousness until the ambulance arrived. I don't envy her. We spent months in the hospital with broken bones and torn ligaments and muscle. I think the only thing that had saved us permanent damage might have been the seats of our vehicle resisting our changes. We told the doctors we had been in a car accident. They shook their heads at us and kept asking questions. But damage was done to my vehicle and to Katie and me, both physically and psychologically, and while our bodies are on the mend, I don't think we'll ever be the same. I feel the wrong way inside. And number X200B. R. OD.
That last one tasted like fear and poor decisions. Let's see what the next bite stirs. Hope you're hungry.
The Limping Woman, by Pippinaceous. Click. "Help me," she whispers. It's an urgent, anguished plea. "Please, I'm hurt, help me." It was said that she was a teacher at the elementary school some decades before. Young, beautiful, and the victim of a terrible murder. She had been walking home to the house she shared with her parents one night after school when she realized she was being followed. She sped up and so did her pursuer, until both were running down this dark country lane with only open farmland on either side. I was always skeptical at best of the story. I'd passed the spot where she was supposed to appear 100 times without incident, as did everyone else I knew. If a murderous ghost lived there, I was pretty sure I'd have seen her. I said as much to my friend Steffi when she brought up that a friend of a friend of a friend had met the limping woman during lunch at school one day. Heard her, whatever, you know what I mean, Rena. And we all just magically knew to use them to ward off being killed, I finished for her. Okay, I said, hoping that would be enough to put an end to the topic. It was an argument neither of us would win and I didn't feel like getting into it, again, over whether or not a ghost was real. Steffi, however, wasn't going to let me off so easily. They say she remains because they got the wrong guy and she's angry about it. Like, everyone knew it, but no one cared because they wanted to blame someone. Don't you feel at least a little bad for her? She's still waiting for justice after all this time. Steffi dash. She only goes after people who don't believe in her, you know. I didn't like the way Steffi said that, like she had an idea forming that I wouldn't approve of, and I shook my head. Whatever it is, no. No, don't be dumb, I said. You don't believe anyway, so what's the big deal? Have you gone after dark? Steffi had started to smile. That's when she's active, going in the day doesn't count. We'll go tonight. The sun set just after 5 that evening. At 7, we met up on our bikes in front of my neighborhood. Her parents thought she was doing a project at mine thought I was at hers, and we had 2 hours to ride out to the farm where the limping woman was said to haunt and get back before they started trading phone calls. We pedaled hard and fast, leaving behind the glow from windows and street lamps until darkness swallowed up the world around us. With only moonlight to guide us, we wove our way across town and passed into the outskirts, where the insects were louder, the stars brighter, and the safety that came from feeling like you were surrounded by other people fell away. It was hard not feel entirely exposed out on that old road, where flat fields rolled off into the distance on either side. There was the occasional barn or farmhouse set a ways off down long, dusty drives, but otherwise, it really was just us and our bikes and the night. We skid to a stop a few yards away from it and exchanged a glance almost lost in the shadows. No, I said. It was an honest enough answer. I was nervous, sure, but who wouldn't be when you're outside after dark? Ready? And then I realized how quiet it was. To my surprise, Steffi sighed, disappointed. I wondered if she realized how quiet everything had become. How could she not feel how claustrophobic it had become out on that open road, how closed off we were in the dark and the silence. Behind us, grass rustled, followed by the crunch of loose gravel underfoot. Like someone was pulling themselves slowly out of the field and onto the road. Drag. Click. Click. Every hair on my body stood up at once. From somewhere over my shoulder, a woman started to sob softly. Rena? Steffi said again. As she's coming, I managed to whisper. Instead of being scared, Steffi snorted. Real funny. I get it, okay. The limping woman is just made up, I'm convinced now. You don't have to rub it in. The unmistakable sound of someone inching towards us, slowly, painfully, crying out with each step. Please, she begged, I'm hurt and he's still out there. Steffi, I hissed, tears burning in my eyes, she's coming. What do I do? I begged, my mind white and blank. Please, the limping woman sobbed, turn around. Help me. The words, Steffi said hurriedly, you have to say the words when she's right behind you. The legend said you'd hear her uneven footsteps and be forced to listen to her pleas, but no one ever mentioned the smell. The stench of rot and earth and blood oozed through the air, slowly surrounding me and wrapping itself around me like tentacles. Smothering me. I gagged and pressed my free hand over my mouth and shook my head violently, trying to clear it, trying to make sense of things. Steffi was jerking on my arm and saying something to me, over and over again, but I could barely hear her over the limping woman's cries. The smell was getting so strong, making my stomach pitch and heave until I thought I'd be sick. Drag. Click. The limping woman was so close behind us now that I could feel the chill radiating off of her. It just reminds her of her own mother and she gets distracted by her grief and leaves you alone. I heard Steffi's voice from the previous day echo in my head. From somewhere off in the night, a dog started to howl. Insects began to sing again. The wind whistled across the field. Sounds of normalcy. Of life. We didn't stop riding until we made it back to my lawn and, when we got there, I raced to the bushes on the side of the house and vomited.
Anyway, let's lighten the mood with something fun and... Nah, just kidding. It gets worse. Hit it.
Options were discussed, plans were investigated, and treatments were researched. We worked with the doctors and listened to everything they had to say. With solidarity, we decided not to say anything to anyone. At least not right away. They were still conducting tests to verify how serious it was and determine the exact stage. It was beyond superficial, they said, but they still needed to determine other factors. Then came the worst day of Beth's life, and the second worst day of mine. The full diagnosis. The doctors spent months treating me while poking and prodding my body with tests. They had come to a complete consensus. I would die within the next year. The cancer had spread too far for me to ever truly recover. They could prolong my life with treatments, maybe even beyond that year mark, but not much. I am religious and she is not, if that's any explanation. It was a nasty fight. We made up when she woke up sobbing and I had to hold her. I agreed to pay for treatments to extend my life. After all, she would suffer more than I would. I could give her more time, at the very least. I ended up stopping my access to Facebook. There was no reason to see that every day. I started treatment, which made me weaker and more irritable each time. I hated watching myself snap at Beth over something so simple. I couldn't help it, and I could only watch from the inside my mind as her soul was crushed. The worst day of my life was when Beth started to resent me. It was a visible change ever since I yelled. Everything had been building, and that argument had broken the dam. She barely smiled, and didn't look me in the eyes often. I wasted away in bed, paying for treatments that only prolonged the inevitable. He showed up at the house completely unannounced. He was over 90 and still walking around. He had to take a taxi anywhere or convince a family member to take him away from the old folks' home, but he was relatively functional. "I hear you're going to beat me to the grave," Papa smiled. His hand, shaking with age, fell over one of mine. His skin felt like thin leather, clinging to his skeleton by mere threads. The skin on his arms hung from him like deflated balloons. I wondered if my body would get to that point. What would my body look like when I was dead? "I just might," I weakly joked back. "Hope you're ready to be a pallbearer." He laughed loudly at that. Two people who knew they were close to death making jokes about it as if it were nothing. It felt good. For once in my life, I felt a kinship with my grandpa. "Yes, I fear the day that I become bedridden," he said quietly. His eyes wandered for a few minutes. I didn't say anything. We just sat there, the seconds leading us towards death passing painfully by. "That's new, usually people ask if I need anything." "Yes, well, I'm old and can't afford to not be blunt." "What's the favor?" I swallowed. "I want you to be cremated," he blurted. My mouth dropped open. "What?" I'm a Catholic, and cremation had come up but I'd always firmly declined. Burial was sacred. "I want you to be cremated," he said again with different emphasis. "But it's against the church," I started. I remembered my fight with Beth and chose to swallow my shouts. My teeth clenched automatically. I want to be buried. Properly. I had to swallow and clear my throat. I don't want to screw up my chances at heaven. I've checked with the church and made sure that it will be within the rules. Your ashes won't be scattered and they'll be left in a holy place. It will be just like you're buried. That's the story portion, he said quietly. Papa turned towards the door to make sure it was still shut. Do you remember your grandmother? Mama? I lowered my head, feeling embarrassed to talk about his dead wife. My dead grandma. His head bobbed a little in acknowledgement. Took all of 3 days to get everything settled. The funeral planning was terrible, the speech was terrible, and even the people were terrible. Very few understood. Only one of my friends had a deceased spouse, so none of them truly understood. I was alone. After we buried her, I moped around the house for a few days, completely unsure of what I was going to do. I couldn't even wash the dishes without wondering what the point was. I was in a dark and terrible place, Joseph. It was night time, for days after we buried Melinda. I was lying awake in bed when I heard the front door open. I didn't even bother to get up. If a burglar was coming to steal my things, let them. If they planned to kill me too, I was okay with that. He stopped for a moment to wipe his eyes. It was a ghost, I thought automatically. And then we embraced, he continued. My eyes narrowed in disbelief. At first, I thought she was a spirit, a ghost, Papa said, echoing my thoughts. But she was physically there. I hugged her, and kissed her, and she did the same back. She was there, Joseph. She didn't say a word, and she didn't have to. We made it to the bed and I was just so excited to see her. I won't specify details, for your sake. But she came back. He looked up to find my furrowed brows and confused expression. At the end, I will, he assured me. I spoke with the director of the cemetery and introduced him to my wife. He hadn't seen my wife's body, nor been at the funeral, so he had no idea what she looked like. But he was absolutely skeptical. I told him that someone else's family member was buried in her grave, but he told me that it was impossible. I urged him to dig up the casket and determine who was really buried there, but he refused. I got angry and yelled, trying to reiterate my point, but he shook his head and told us there was nothing he could do. I nodded, remembering it and suddenly very interested that there might be a way to confirm his story through my mom. She made the drive while I made dinner. When she arrived, she couldn't get out of the car. The door wasn't broken or anything, she just stopped. I saw her eyes meet Melinda's, and she couldn't even bring herself to open the door because she was so overwhelmed. It's understandable, after just burying your own mother. She didn't even come inside. She told me to get in the car and come with her. I started to, and brought Melinda, but she backed up instead and drove away. I was confused, but chalked it up to her grief. She called a minute later, while she drove, and told me to leave without Melinda. I asked her what was wrong, but she refused to say. I told her to please come home and that Melinda missed her, but she hung up. The whole time, Melinda stroked my back as if she were comforting me for all the grief from her death. She just smiled when I tried to tell her that her own daughter wouldn't come by. I thought that meant that she understood. I got all of 3 days with Melinda. We stayed at home and I cooked all of her favorite meals. I thought that the heart attack had killed her appetite, because she didn't eat anything. No amount of questions would get her to speak to me. It began to be concerning that she wouldn't speak. I remember thinking, she didn't have a seizure or an aneurysm, so why isn't she talking? I wondered if her brain was broken somehow or if she was simply choosing not to speak. I got a doctor's appointment, but never got to take her there. He sighed. Instead of explaining, your father grabbed me by the wrist and practically dragged me to the car. I didn't yell or really fight, I was just confused. He buckled me in, and we drove off. I remember that he was driving rather erratically, watching the rearview mirror every few seconds. He looked anxious, but wouldn't reply when I asked what was wrong. We pulled into the cemetery, and I understood that this was about Melinda. You would think that after only one visit that I wouldn't remember where her grave was, but I knew exactly where he would stop. There were 4 people standing around her grave. Arthur led me out of the car and over to the group. "You are Mr. Bradley Duncan?" the cemetery director asked as we approached. "Yes, I met you a few days ago," I commented. He nodded. "You took my advice, I see. Who was buried?" Everyone fell uncomfortably silent. Your mother stared at the ground. Your father watched her with worry. No one was, the director said at last. I got confused, and pushed my way around them all. I got to the other side of the grave, and lifted the lid on the casket. Empty. The pillow was still there, but the casket seemed unused except for some crumbs of dirt that had made their way inside. This time, one of the police officers stepped forward. He told me that the grave had been found that morning with the dirt in a pile and a shovel next to it. The grave had been slightly ajar, and with the bit of dirt inside. He asked through a thinly veiled question if I knew anything about it. The question veiled an accusation. We pulled into the driveway, and everyone got out. I was told to stay outside with one of the officers while the other officer checked the house. Your mother and father were also told to stay outside. We waited for a while before the first officer returned. He said that no one was home. I expressed my confusion and raced into the house. Arthur and your mother followed me out of concern. The officers went in behind as well. Melinda must have turned out all the lights and shut all the blinds, because it was extremely dark inside. We advanced out of the door's entrance and into the living room. That's when everything turned to hell. A figure dashed out of the bedroom, but on their hands and feet like an animal. Everyone was yelling as it sped towards us down the hallway. The single light above it obscured its face in shadow and made its movements look unnatural. I heard a hiss, and then my ears exploded. It took me a moment to realize that both of the officers had begun firing at the thing. It recoiled, but only for a second. For those first few intense seconds, I thought someone or something else had broken into the house, but another full glance at the thing crawling towards us told me that it was Melinda. It was, and it wasn't. I still don't know how Arthur sorted it out. He spoke with the 2 of them for a while in the bedroom. After a few minutes, they both left. They avoided eye contact with the body as they passed by. One of them caught my eye on the way out, then the door slammed. I took those ashes, Joseph, Papa said, taking his hand away from mine. My palms were sweating from his story. He lifted a chain from around his neck and lifted it over his head. He set the small glass vial in my palm. It was full of black sand, but the irregular shapes and the way it clung to the glass told me that it was indeed ashes. I've held on to them ever since. And I've spoken more and more to your father about what happened. He let me stare at the vial for a few minutes, processing everything. When I was done, I handed it back to him. He placed it securely around his neck again, tucking it under his shirt. When your mother came by that one day, she knew. She knew that it wasn't Melinda. I don't know how she did and I didn't, but she did. And when she confided in Arthur, he didn't believe her. But she was so shaken up and so upset that after a few days, he decided to do something about it. Something illegal. When he found the legends, my heritage confirmed that it must be correct. The Strigoi. Heard of it? I shook my head. That's when I laughed. The whole time he'd just been telling a story. His expression reflected hurt, and I immediately regretted laughing. But it was too late. My laughter had shut him down. Unconsciously, he buttoned his top button to further hide the ashes. "I want you to be cremated so that the myth of the Strigoi stays that way," he said, abrupt. "I'm asking you to put it in your will. I have proof of what happened to your mama. I have the bites to prove it, Joseph. Just know, Joseph, that whether you tell your wife to cremate you or not, I will." He shut the door faster than I could react, and I was left alone in my room with the sun starting to set. The room felt much colder than it had before. I laid awake for hours, retelling the story in my head. The part that stands out to me are the supposed conditions that can turn your corpse into a Strigoi.
Still with us? Good. That last one was just the warm-up. Let's go deeper.
An Old Man's Last Secret, by Tobias Wade. This was it then. The end of the road was in sight. "Would you like me to call Dad back?" I asked. Grandfather shook his head as far as the oxygen tubes would allow it to turn. I'd rather he didn't know. I already knew some of the story he told me. It began when my grandfather was 20 years old living in Nazi Germany. He'd been working forced labor on a farm, but managed to smuggle my grandmother and infant father out of the country hidden in a grain shipment. He'd been caught almost immediately and sent to the concentration camp at Buchenwald, where he endured the next 2 years until he was liberated by Allied forces. The SS officer had gone straight from the Hitlerjugend, Hitler Youth Group, to the army and had never been intimate with a woman. He became enraptured in my grandfather's tales of romance, and the two became close friends despite the circumstances. The officer twice spared my grandfather's name from work assignments that meant certain death, and he'd often slip extra rations through the fence which my grandfather would then distribute to other prisoners. Things changed as the war began drawing to a close. The Nazi officers became increasingly paranoid and desperate as the Allied forces moved in. It became common practice for lower-ranking officers to be held as scapegoats when impossible work orders were not met. Besides that, the rumor that the Roten Führer was protecting my grandfather put him in a dire position with his own officers. Faced between protecting my grandfather and his own hide, the Roten Führer signed the order for my grandfather to be sent to a nearby armaments factory. 18-hour work days, starvation rations, no medical attention. The factory might as well have been a death sentence. The 3-month survival rate was less than 50%. Shielded from the worst of the camp by the Roten Führer, the transition to the factory proved too difficult for the young farmer. He didn't last the first week. The exertion of the long story was taking its toll on my grandfather. He coughed and wheezed, struggling to draw a breath for several seconds before clearing his throat a final time. On April 11, 1945, the Buchenwald camp was liberated. Many of the Nazis had already abandoned their position and fled into the country. Others decided to lock themselves inside, pretending to be prisoners themselves so the Allied forces would have mercy on them. This was especially convincing for those who had taken the time to get to know the prisoners and could assume their identities. When the SS officer gave the information and address of his lost love, he was allowed to board the next transport ship returning to America to be reunited with her.
And now, as the hour gets cold, and the shadows stretch long into the corners of your room, it's time.
Yeah. Chew the spooky violin. But seriously, this next one? Even I didn't sleep after hearing it.
I've claimed something coming from you.
What? Just because I sleep in a coffin and collect cursed dolls?
Among other things. This is the final descent for the night. One last story, dragged up from the depths of the disturbed and deranged.
Go ahead. Turn off the lights. We dare you.
This is Horror Slop.
I administered lethal injections for the state. This is the Man Who Made Me Quit, by Max Voynich. It's the same every time. Saline solution, flush the line again. Always remember to flush the line. Within a minute or two, they're declared dead. I've been a state executioner for a while now, coming on 5 years. It's decent pay, sure, and as there aren't many who are willing to do it, who are willing to get really up close and personal, you'll often find that you've got a choice of where you want to live. If a state has the death penalty, and administers the injection, chances are there'll be work for you there. I'd had to grow up hearing that, called on to talk shows when my voice had barely broken, asked to comment on the deranged genius behind the death of my family, the symbolism of the way he'd flayed their skin, asked if I had any clue what the words on the wall meant. I didn't, if you're curious. 1530 Norton exclaims, "Holy shit." 1534 calls for backup. There were parts too, they didn't mention. Darker things, insane ramblings, pages from notebooks with these strange drawings, figures reaching out past the page, rambling interior monologues. It comes and there is nothing we can do, we are stuck, it comes, we are stuck, move back to move forward, it comes, there is nothing we can do, I am alone, we are alone, nothing we can do, the cycle continues, the cycle marches on unchanged, always nothing we can do. There were vague connections between the families targeted. It wasn't just mine, although they were the first. I'd known the victims' families, memories that refused to show themselves no matter how much I tried. I remembered big get-togethers, the adults laughing and drunk, attending church together, services spoken in tongues, candles and glyphs and songs in Latin. Maybe I'd pictured him all these years so intensely, every night in my dreams and every morning when I steeled myself for work, I couldn't see it in his face. Part of me just was not able to see it. He had a strange air about him, this sense of calm that only he disturbed. As if nothing around him could affect him because whatever had a hold over him was inside. His eyes were dark. He'd occasionally look around the room, close his eyes for a second, say something, before opening them again. Like he was checking for something. I left my hood outside as well. Entered. He continued speaking. "You look older." He rolled his eyes. Was he enjoying this? I tried to be professional, if I couldn't speak I could at least do my job, could at least kill him. I fumbled the needle for a moment, and it fell onto the floor. I had never, in all my years, fumbled before. Never. It was a point of pride for me, steady hands. My heart stopped for a moment, but the casing was still on. I could breathe. As I came up I met his eye again. A beat. As if he knew what I was going to do before I did it. As if, I thought for a brief moment, he'd done this before. "Good luck, Jack," he was saying, "it's up to you now and it's over for me and I'm so glad I'm free and I'm so sorry Jack, it's you now, no choice, you'll know when you know, and it's you now Jack, it's always you, it's always us dash." I knew it was true. He hadn't just wanted to be caught, he'd wanted to die. "Rough day, huh? Heard it was a weird one for you, Jack." Yeah, it was. He knew my name, kept rambling in these weird whispers, said it was me now, and he was free and dash. I paused. Took a breath. It was fucked, man. It was fucked. Mark seemed confused. "The guys said it must have been a hard execution for you." "Why's that?"
And there you have it, dear listeners. One final scream, echoing into the void.
Yeah. Void screams, eternal darkness, I did it. Can I eat now?
We're still on air, Roxy.
Oh no, just the spooky FCC is gonna haunt us for breaking the mood.
If you enjoyed tonight's descent into depravity, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and what does he always say?
Stab that bell icon like it's your ex possessed by a demon. And leave a comment telling us what story made you question. I have choices.
And if you survive the night, we'll be waiting.
Same dat time, same that crypt.
You're the reason we have complaints, you know that.
You're welcome.